Chapter 101. Secret exposed. Gawain secretly sent the news to Jonaran that Robert Baratheon's 3 children, including his heir, were actually illegitimate children born from incest between Queen Cersei Lannister and her twin brother Jaime Lannister. He also informed Queen Cersei and Littlefinger Peter that Jonaran had learned of the matter. Gawain believed that Cersei would find ways to eliminate Jonaran, the insider, in order to protect herself, and Littlefinger, who had long wanted to create chaos and get a chance, would definitely add fuel to the fire. King's Landing Maegor's hold-fast Cersei's face was gloomy, and her eyes showed anger and fear. She held the letter tightly, her hands trembling slightly, and her other hand tightly grasped Jaime's arm. "Jaime." Her voice was sharp and urgent. "How could our secret be discovered? This damn letter said that not only did someone know about what happened between you and me, but it also mentioned that Jonaran knew about it. You must kill that old thing as soon as possible, do it as soon as possible, or it will be too late." Jaime frowned, looking embarrassed. The guards of the Hand's Tower were all brought by Jon from the Vale. "It's hard for me to find an opportunity to take action. Besides, what should I do after killing Jonaran?" "What do you mean?" Cersei glared at him. "Do you want to see our affair exposed? If Robert finds out, our children, Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella, will all die. Do you understand?" She paced back and forth angrily. "I really hate myself for being a woman. I should be using a sword to solve the problem instead of just standing here and worrying." Jaime took a deep breath and tried to comfort her. "Cersei, calm down first. I will find a way to send you and Joffrey back to the west." "Calm down? How can you ask me to calm down?" Cersei stopped and stared at Jaime fiercely. "Jonaran is already investigating. Time is running out. We must find a way to get rid of him as soon as possible, otherwise everything will be over. Even if you send me and the child back to the west, Robert will not let us go, and the west will not be able to stop the Iron Throne." "I know, dear sister." James' expression also became serious, "but we can't rush this matter. Once discovered, the consequences will be disastrous. We must act cautiously and find the most appropriate time." Cersei bit her lip and was silent for a moment, then said slowly, "Okay, find a solution as soon as possible. Remember, we have no way out, for the children and for ourselves." Jaime came down from Maegor's holdfast, looking flustered, with beads of sweat on his forehead and his eyes wandering. He walked hurriedly, as if driven by an invisible fear, and every step seemed heavy and flustered. His hands clenched unconsciously, and the blue veins stood out on his fair skin. Suddenly, when he turned a corner, he almost bumped into Peter. Peter still had that signature humble smile on his face, bowed slightly and greeted him, "Good day, Sir Jaime." At this time, Jaime had no intention of paying attention to the other party. He just lowered his head and said in a low and hurried voice, "Sir Peter, I have something else to do. I won't chat with you anymore." After that, without waiting for Peter to answer, he hurried away, leaving behind only a flustered sound of footsteps. Peter looked at Jaime's departing back, his eyes slowly moving up the stairs that Jaime came down from Maegor's tower. His eyes were deep and complex, making it hard to read. The smile on his lips gradually faded, replaced by a thoughtful look. No one knew what he was thinking about, and there seemed to be a bottomless conspiracy hidden in his eyes. After hesitating for a moment, he took a deep breath, straightened his clothes, and then walked up the stairs of Maegor's tower with cautious steps. At the same time, in the tower of the Prime Minister, Jonaran held the letter, his hands trembling slightly, and the letter made a slight rustling sound in his hands. He frowned, staring at the words on the letter. His heart was like a storm, and he couldn't calm down for a long time. His eyes were full of disbelief, but the evidence listed in the letter was so conclusive that he had to worry about this cruel fact. He paced back and forth in the room, and each step seemed heavy and hesitant. His face was full of embarrassment and confusion, and the wrinkles on his forehead became deeper, as if telling of his inner torment. He was struggling fiercely in his heart. Is it true or false? Should I tell Robert now? If I conceal this, how can my conscience be at peace? But if I tell Robert, he will be furious after knowing this, with his hot temper, and no one will be able to stop him. The 7 kingdoms will be in chaos, war will break out between the Iron Throne and the West, and the entire kingdom will be engulfed in endless chaos and war. What should I do? Jonaran fell into deep worry. He didn't know who sent the message, but that person must have a conspiracy. Once he made a choice, he would most likely fall into a bigger trap. He stopped, sighed heavily, and placed his hands on the edge of the table, lowering his head. The wind whistled past the window, making the curtains rustle, but it could not blow away the haze in his heart. At this moment, the waiter pushed the door open, saluted to Janaran, and said respectfully, "Prime Minister, His Majesty has called a royal meeting. I hope you can attend now." Janaran was slightly shocked, and when he came back to his senses, the worry on his face had not faded. He took a deep breath, tried to calm down, and said in a deep voice, "I know, I'll go right over." He quickly put the letter in his hand into the drawer, straightened his clothes, a trace of fatigue flashed in his eyes, and then he followed the waiter and hurried to the imperial meeting. Ever since the news that Gaon Bellaris was going to marry Princess Daenerys reached King's Landing half a month ago, Robert had been furious and vowed to attack the Stepstones and execute Gaon Bellaris, the traitor and the remnant of the Targaryen family. Only by his constant persuasion and admonition did he manage to suppress Robert's impulse. But it was obvious that Robert was not so calm, and his wisdom was occupied by hatred. In the past few days, Robert, who rarely attended private meetings, has been actively convening private meetings, hoping to launch a war against the Stepstones. For this purpose, he even summoned his brother Stannis to King's Landing. At every meeting, Robert's face turned red, he roared loudly, and waved his strong arms, as if he wanted to kill Gavan Bellaris immediately. The ministers standing by were silent, no one dared to speak easily, for fear of angering the king who was in a rage. Only Janaran, the experienced prime minister, was still trying hard to calm Robert down. Chapter 102, Janaran's Plot. In front of the door of the royal council chamber, Janaran paused and sighed helplessly. He knew that Robert would not listen to any advice at this moment, but he still could not give up, because he knew very well what kind of disaster an unnecessary war would bring to the kingdom. As the door was opened, a tense and oppressive atmosphere filled the imperial meeting room. At this time, Robert Baratheon sat on the throne with a gloomy face, his anger was like a volcano about to erupt. His eyes were fixed on the ministers below, and that gaze seemed to penetrate everyone's soul. Ignoring Jon who had just entered the room, King Robert continued speaking in a deep and powerful voice, "That bastard Gavan actually planned to marry Daenerys. He obviously wants to be king of the Stepstones, and he has thoughts of getting his hands on the Iron Throne. He is simply challenging my authority, and I will never let him go. And that Daenerys, the remnants of the Targaryen family, they are all traitors and must be punished. I will send troops to attack the Stepstones and tear them into pieces." Janaran walked to his seat and sat down, his expression solemn and worried. "Your Majesty, please calm down. We cannot ignore the lessons of history. The Iron Throne has been mired in wars with the Stepstones several times before, and each time it has caused us great pain. The once powerful House Velaryon also became sluggish after a battle for the Stepstones. We cannot repeat the mistakes of history." Robert frowned and looked at Janaran with dissatisfaction. "Are we going to let those two traitors go unpunished? I am the king, where is my dignity?" At this time, Sea Lord Stannis Baratheon spoke up. "Your Majesty, the current situation of the royal fleet is indeed not optimistic. The ships are seriously aging and there is a shortage of personnel. If we want to go to war, we must repair the ships and replenish the personnel, which will take a lot of time." The Minister of Finance Peter Baelish also echoed, "Your Majesty, the financial situation of the Iron Throne is also very tight. We still owe a large amount of gold dragons to the Iron Bank, the Church and the Lannister family. The Iron Throne does not have enough funds to support this war." King Robert snorted and said, "We can ask Tywin for more. Isn't it said that all his shit is gold?" Janaran quickly advised, "Your Majesty, Lord Tywin Lannister is indeed rich, you should maintain due respect for the Warden of the West. Moreover, over-reliance on borrowing is not a long-term solution. This will put us in debt." King Robert remained silent, his hands tightly gripping the armrests of the throne, as if trying to suppress his inner rage. The imperial meeting fell into a brief silence, with everyone thinking about the current situation. At this time, Grand Maester Pycelle said, "Your Majesty, I understand your anger towards the traitors, but we must weigh the pros and cons. War will not only consume personnel and wealth, but may also cause domestic unrest." Robert was furious when he heard this. "Are we going to do nothing? Gavan's actions are a direct challenge to my rule. If I do not respond, the other lords may think I am weak and incompetent." Janaran thought for a moment and said, "Your Majesty, Perhaps we can try to solve the problem through diplomatic means first. Send an envoy to negotiate with Gaon, appoint him as the Prince of the Stepstones and the Guardian of the Narrow Sea, and ask him to voluntarily hand over Princess Daenerys. Renly Baratheon agreed. Yes, diplomacy can sometimes have unexpected results. We can put pressure on the Stepstones to force Gawain to give in and hand over Daenerys. Everyone expressed their agreement. After hearing what the ministers said, Robert was furious and shouted, "You are a bunch of useless people, cowardly bastards. I want iron-blooded means, not fucking peace talks. All of you know how to talk nonsense here, but you dare not bring that bastard's head back to me. What about weighing the pros and cons, what about diplomatic means, it's all bullshit." Everyone was frightened by Robert's scolding and was so silent that they dared not even breathe. After a long while, Robert's anger subsided a little. He panted and glared at everyone and said, "Listen to me, give Gavin one last chance, make him hand over Daenerys and confess his crime himself, otherwise, I will personally lead the army to flatten the Stepstones." In the end, the royal meeting ended in disharmony amid Robert's rage. Jonaran left worriedly, thinking about how to deal with the situation that might happen next. Others also left with their own thoughts, and the whole palace was shrouded in a haze. Robert returned to his residence angrily, his face as dark as the sky before a storm. As soon as he entered the door, he yelled at Lancel Lannister, the squire beside him, "Fool, pour me a glass of wine." Lancel was frightened by the sudden roar and hurriedly poured a full glass of wine for Robert. Robert sat down on the chair, feeling angry. He thought that after becoming the king, he was constrained by his ministers in every way. Although he knew they were right, he still had no freedom. Thinking of this, he grabbed the wine glass and drank the wine in the glass. "It's so frustrating." Robert slammed the wine glass on the table. At this time, he said to Barristan beside him, "Get your weapons ready, we are going to the royal forest to hunt." Barristan looked embarrassed and whispered, "Your Majesty, the state affairs are very busy now. I am afraid it is not appropriate for you to be in the royal forest for more than 10 days. Robert was furious when he heard this. He shouted, "Bullshit! If I can't fight, can't I go hunting? What's the point of being a king?" Barristan knew Robert's temper very well, so he didn't dare to say anything more. He could only bow his head and reply, "Yes, Your Majesty. I will go and prepare weapons for you." Robert snorted coldly, his face still terribly gloomy. He sat there panting and looking at the empty wine glass in his hand. Robert scolded Lancel again, "What are you still standing there for? Pour the wine. Do I need to remind you every time? You idiot from Lannister." Lancel's face was pale, and his hands were shaking as he quickly filled Robert's glass with wine. Robert drank it all again, and the wine flowed down the corners of his mouth and soaked his beard. "This life is so unbearable." Robert cursed and slammed his hand on the table. Lancel stood aside, not daring to breathe. Robert sat there, his eyes full of anger and helplessness, and he kept muttering some complaints. After a while, Barristan returned and reported, "Your Majesty, everything is ready." Robert stood up suddenly and shouted, "Go!" The group set off in the direction of the King's Guard, with Robert riding on his horse, his face still full of anger. Chapter 103. Poisoned Wine. Jonaran walked towards the Prime Minister's tower with steady steps. The sunlight shone on him, but failed to dispel the solemnity between his brows, which was as tight as a thick cloud. However, just as he was about to step onto the steps leading to the Prime Minister's tower, he suddenly stopped. His eyes instantly became deep, as if he remembered something extremely important, and then he turned around decisively and hurriedly walked towards the residence of Grand Maester Pycelle. Jonaran stepped into Pycelle's room, which was filled with the unique smell of old books and herbs. Pycelle was sitting at a table piled with scrolls and books, concentrating on studying something. Hearing footsteps, he slowly raised his head, the wrinkles on his face became deeper due to nervousness, and there was a hint of panic in his eyes. "Grand Maester Pycelle." Jonaran's voice was low and powerful, echoing in the slightly cramped room. Pycelle stood up tremblingly, his slightly hunched body swaying slightly due to old age, and responded, "Prime Minister, I wonder why you suddenly come here this time." Jonaran stared at him intently, and said straight to the point, "I need detailed records of the children of nobles. Do you have any?" Pycelle thought for a moment and asked slowly, "Sir, this record of noble children. I wonder what specific aspect you want? Is it the marriage situation or the family inheritance?" Jonaran frowned and asked, I want all of them. Are there many books like this? Just the ones that mainly introduce the great nobles will do. A trace of thought flashed across Pycel's cloudy eyes. He trembled and fumbled among the bookshelves for a long time. Finally, from a pile of books that almost buried him, he took out with great effort a huge book that was so heavy that it almost bent his arm. My lord, I wonder if this book, Genealogy and History of the Principal Nobles of the Seven Kingdoms, meets your requirements. Pycelle said as he handed the book over carefully, as if it were an extremely precious and fragile treasure. Jonaran took the book and quickly flipped through a few pages. His face became increasingly gloomy, and he said, Excuse me, Maester Pycelle. I would like to borrow this book for a few days. Pycelle nodded quickly, beads of sweat rolling down his wrinkles. Of course, sir, you can borrow it any time. If you have any other questions, you can ask me again. Jonaran nodded and left. There was silence in the tower of the Prime Minister at night. Jonaran sat in front of a large table, the faint candlelight flickering in the darkness, illuminating his solemn face. Outside the window, the night was as dark as ink, so thick that it seemed to swallow everything. Not a single starlight could penetrate the thick night, only a dim moon loomed behind the clouds, casting a hazy glow. The room was so quiet that one could hear the slight crackling of the burning candles and the occasional sound of Jonaran turning pages. The thick and boring genealogy and history of the major nobles of the Seven Kingdoms was spread out in front of him, and the yellowed paper and blurred handwriting seemed to tell the vicissitudes of time. Jonaran read attentively, his brows furrowed, his eyes moving between the lines, trying to find the answer he was looking for in this complicated record. Not long after, he finished reading the book, slowly closed it, and sighed deeply. Strong breed, Jonaran muttered to himself, thinking of what he had just seen. Every bastard of the Baratheon family recorded in the book has hair as black as night. More than 90 years ago, the last union between the stag and the lion occurred when Tia Lannister married Gwen Baratheon, the third child in his family. Their only child was an unnamed premature baby boy, described in Melian's book as big, with a good appetite and a full head of black hair. 30 years earlier, a Lannister man married a Baratheon girl. She bore him 3 daughters and a son, all with black hair. No matter how he traced back through the thin, yellowed pages, gold would always yield to black. He stood up, stretched his stiff body, and slowly walked to the window, staring outside. The night was still dark, like an endless mystery that enveloped the entire world. Jonaran's eyes wandered in the darkness, hesitating. At first he had fantasies, but now he had solid evidence. His hands unconsciously clenched the windowsill, his knuckles turning white from the force. The breeze brushed across his face, but it couldn't calm the turmoil in his heart. Just as Jonaran was lost in thought, Lady Lisa Tully pushed the door open gently. She held a pot of wine in her hand, her face full of concern, but deep in her eyes there was a hint of barely perceptible panic. John, it's so late, don't tire yourself out. Lisa said softly, with tenderness and concern in her voice. However, her hand holding the wine jug seemed to tremble slightly unconsciously. Jonaran turned his head and looked at his wife. There was a touch of kindness in his eyes. He smiled and said, It's nothing important, just some government affairs. I will go to rest now. Lisa Tully walked forward and poured Jonaran a glass of wine, which glowed a strange red in the candlelight. She consoled him, If there are any troublesome matters, please let the Imperial Council handle them. You must take care of your health. Jonaran looked at Lisa, his heart filled with relief. He took the wine glass and drank it all. Don't worry, ma'am, I know my body well. After saying that, he gently patted Lisa's hand. He said, My lady, I have an idea. Robert's child is growing up. I think it will be better for his future if he is sent to Stannis to be raised. Lisa Tully was extremely reluctant, but she still hid it and said, My dear, the child is still young and not in good health. How about, wait until he is a little older? Jonaran frowned, thought for a moment and said, Stannis can indeed give Robert better instruction and training. Madam, I understand your reluctance, but this is vital to Robert's future. There was a flash of anxiety in Lisa Tully's eyes. She held Jonaran's arm tightly and said, I really can't bear to see him leave me at such a young age. Give me some more time, dear. Jonaran looked at his lady, feeling a little reluctant, but he finally nodded, Okay, then let's wait until he is older. Then, the two smiled at each other and left the room together. But Jonaran didn't notice that after he turned around, a crazy and determined look flashed across Lisa's face. Chapter 104. Death of the Prime Minister. The next morning, Jonaran woke up with a strong discomfort that almost suffocated him. He felt dizzy and as if an invisible mountain weighed 1,000 pounds on his head. His whole body seemed to be hit hard by a heavy hammer, and every inch of his muscle was sore and he had no strength. Even so, thinking of the many urgent matters that needed to be dealt with, especially the fact that the envoys to the Stone Steps Islands had not yet been arranged, he still gritted his teeth and forced his extremely weak body to stand up. He stepped out of the room tremblingly, but after only a few steps, the dizziness like a tsunami came over him. The scene in front of him became blurry in an instant, the world was spinning, his legs went weak, and he sat down on the cold ground powerlessly. The waiter beside him saw this and was panicked. He rushed forward to help him up and asked in a trembling voice, "Sir, are you okay?" Jonaran's face was as pale as paper, with beads of sweat rolling down his forehead. He waved his hands with great effort, and said in a weak and intermittent voice, "It's okay. I just feel a little uncomfortable. It should be because I didn't get enough rest last night." With the careful help of the waiter, he slowly returned to the house like a candle in the wind. Lisa Tully heard the noise and hurried over, her face full of concern and anxiety, her eyes full of worry. She walked quickly forward, held Jonaran's hand tightly, and whispered softly with an undisguised tremor in her voice, "My dear, what's wrong with you?" Jonaran's eyes were blurry, and he responded weakly, "I don't know what happened. When I got up today, I felt dizzy and weak all over." Hearing this, Lisa Tully turned around and sternly said to the waiter, "What are you still standing there for? Go and get Grand Maester Pycelle." The waiter was so frightened that he trembled all over and quickly replied, "Yes, ma'am, I'll go right away." Then he ran out like a gust of wind. Lisa Tully quickly ordered someone to fetch warm water and gently wiped Jonaran's forehead herself. She looked so careful, as if she was protecting a rare treasure, but in the depths of her eyes, a hint of excitement and pleasure flashed across her eyes imperceptibly. In Mager's holdfast, Circe was furious, her face flushed red, her eyes seemed to be able to spit out raging fire, and she angrily asked Littlefinger Peter, "Why hasn't that old thing died yet? If he doesn't die, you can't expect to get any benefits from the Lannister family." Peter bowed slightly, his expression still as calm as water, and said calmly, "Your Majesty, please calm down. Stabbing with a dagger or poisoning directly would have too much impact. Once it is discovered, I am afraid we will not be able to escape the blame. But now, his life and death are in your control. Isn't he sick? If he is sick, he will take medicine. We just need to tamper with the medicine a little bit, and we can kill him without anyone noticing, and it will not arouse others' suspicion." Circe's expression eased a little after hearing this, and her tense mouth corners relaxed a little. Gradually, a smug look slowly appeared on her face. She walked towards the window, and Peter's voice came from behind her, "Queen, you don't have to worry. Everything is under your control." Circe stopped walking, turned slowly, stared at Peter with eyes as sharp as swords, and said coldly, "Then do you think it is appropriate to let Jonaran lie dead for a few more days?" Peter bowed humbly and said respectfully, "It all depends on your will, Queen. He will go to see the 7 gods whenever you want him to." After saying this, Littlefinger stood with his head down, like a submissive servant, quietly waiting for Circe's further instructions. Circe narrowed her eyes and fell into deep thought. In the following days, Jonaran's physical condition deteriorated rapidly. He lay in bed, his face as pale as the earth, his appearance as withered as a leaf in late autumn, and his former awe-inspiring majesty and powerful strength had long since disappeared. He occasionally woke up from his coma for a short time, and when he woke up, he shouted at the top of his lungs to send someone to find Robert. Lisa Tully always said indifferently, "His Majesty has gone to the royal forest to hunt. We have sent people to chase him, but we don't know when he will be back." However, every minute and every second of waiting seemed extremely long and torturous. Jonaran's condition became more and more serious like a flood that broke through a dam, and his breath became weaker and weaker, like a candle that was about to be extinguished in the wind. Finally, on a gloomy, depressing and dull day, Jonaran's life came to an end. He used up his last bit of strength and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Strong!" Then, he slowly closed his eyes, and the room suddenly fell into a deathly silence. Lisa Tully stood by the bed, her face showing no trace of the sadness she should have, but instead a hint of elusive, chilling pleasure. Dragon Flame Bay. In the spacious Dragon Cave, a tense atmosphere permeated the dim light. 3 little dragons fought fiercely for a piece of tender meat. They opened their tiny mouths, showing their sharp teeth, and roared and chirped threateningly at each other. The sound was sharp and piercing. They flapped their wings, which had not yet grown fully, and their tiny tails lashed the ground like whips, splashing up clouds of dust. Just as they were fighting fiercely, Vice-Ryan, who was twice their size, rushed out like lightning. It pounced forward, its strong and powerful body knocked the 3 little dragons away, then opened its mouth wide and bit the piece of meat. Then, it spurted out a stream of blazing flames from its mouth, instantly enveloping the meat, which sizzled and became half-cooked. Vice-Ryan then began to chew with satisfaction, a satisfied gurgling sound coming from his throat, and the chewing movements were powerful and fast. The 3 little dragons were unwilling to have their food taken away from them, and they roared angrily at Vice-Ryan, their small bodies trembling slightly with anger. They opened their mouths again, revealing their sharp teeth, and continued to make threatening hissing sounds in their throats, as if protesting against Vice-Ryan's overbearing behavior. However, in this chaotic moment, a deafening roar came from outside the dragon cave. This sound seemed to carry endless majesty and power, making the entire dragon cave tremble. Then, a huge golden dragon flew in. Its huge body exuded a chilling aura, and its golden scales shone brightly in the weak light. The 4 little dragons that were still fighting suddenly became quiet. They stopped talking, and the anger and provocation in their eyes disappeared, replaced by deep fear. They quickly curled up their bodies, trembling and hiding in the corner, not daring to breathe. Chapter 105. Marjorie's Letter. Seeing the 4 young dragons hiding in the corner, Gavin knew that they were fighting for food again. He smiled and scolded them in High Valley Ryan, "Can you be quiet?" The 4 young dragons roared, obviously not taking the reprimand seriously. Jia Ying, who was standing by, sensed the master's intentions and slowly approached the 4 young dragons with his huge head. As he approached, he kept making low roars, like thunder rolling. Seeing Jia Ying's threat, the 4 young dragons instantly became more obedient and dared not move. Gavin smiled, then patted Jia Ying's neck and got off the dragon's back. At this time, Daenerys also came to the dragon's lair with a letter to greet Gavin. When she saw the scene, she knew that the 4 dragons were fighting again, and she smiled helplessly. During this period, Gavin and Daenerys used the blood of the unburnt to successfully hatch 3 new baby dragons at once. With the birth of the baby dragons, new changes also appeared on Gavin's panel. Host, Gavin Bellaris. Age, 18. Bloodline Blood and Fire Dragonborn, developed 65% blood of the Dragon King, possesses the ability to control dragons and flames, and has fire resistance. Domination. 60/63, your slaves can be upgraded via the panel. 40 primary blood dragon guards, blood witch puppets made with dragon blood, can be advanced twice. 8 high-level blood dragon guards, can no longer be upgraded. 1 adult dragons, magical creatures made of blood and fire that cannot be advanced. 3 baby dragons, magical creatures made of blood and fire, unable to advance in infancy. 8 dragon eggs, unhatched baby dragons, hatchable. Skill Fire Mastery, Legend Sword Art, Legend Sunblade, Legend Bow, Master Lance, Mastery. Energy Points, 12, obtained by automatically absorbing the magic power floating around, or actively absorbing magic power. Gavin also confirmed that he could control the dragons through the panel, breaking the rule of 1 dragon rider per person, just like Daenerys in the plot. He couldn't help but look forward to obtaining more dragon eggs. The 2 grey-white little dragons are called Yunzhuang and Wuying, and the brown little dragon is called Zhijiao. Yunzhuang and Wuying are similar in shape, their scales are a light greyish-white, like the frost in the morning, hazy and mysterious. Yunzhuang's eyes are like 2 azure gems, clear and bright. Wuying's eyes are like a deep lake, unpredictable. Although their wings have not yet fully grown, they can already be seen to be agile and powerful in the future. The Thornhorn is different from the others. Its brown scales are like ancient bark, rough and tough. The most special thing is the pair of sharp chamfers on its head, which flash with cold light, showing its uniqueness. Its eyes reveal a stubbornness and wildness, and it is also the most ferocious of the 3 little dragons. These 3 little dragons were born at the same time, but for some reason they kept fighting with each other. Give them 3 pieces of meat, but they will fight for 1 piece. Vice-Ryan, who is standing by, often likes to join in the fun. Whenever food appears, he always rushes over quickly, causing the 3 little dragons to fight for it even more frantically. The dragon cave is often in chaos, with roars and fluttering sounds coming one after another. Daenerys frowned slightly and asked seriously, Gavin, how is the investigation of the situation in King's Landing going? Gavin looked calm and replied, Jon Arryn has been poisoned by Lannister and Littlefinger, Robert Baratheon is still out hunting, and now the whole King's Landing is in chaos. I sent someone to give Stannis a hint, and he now suspects that Lannister is still trying to murder him, and has run back to Dragonstone and refused to go to King's Landing. Without the royal fleet, the Iron Throne will not pose a threat to us in the short term. Daenerys breathed a sigh of relief and said, That's great. What are you going to do next? Wait for the messenger sent to Volantis to return. Gavin looked determined and said, The ballista of all the warships will be replaced soon. Now there is no need to worry. I don't plan to wait for the messenger sent to Volantis to return. This is a rare opportunity. I can take action against Rhys directly now. Daenerys nodded slightly, then handed the letter in her hand to Gavin, with a slight smile on her face, and said with a hint of sourness, A letter from Marjorie Tyrell, daughter of the Duke of Highgarden. She invites you to attend her 16th name day. Gavin looked at Daenerys and said gently, Don't worry. The war is about to start, and I don't have the heart to attend any naming day. I will just write a reply later. Daenerys frowned slightly, with a hint of confusion in her eyes, and said, Even Aegon the Conqueror had 2 wives. You are also a dragon king. If you want to go, go ahead. It's not too late to ride a dragon. Gavin smiled awkwardly, How can that be? Rhys's matter is more important. I won't bother with this. Daenerys sighed softly, By the way, Maester Qyburn just came to see you. He must have something to ask. After hearing this, Gavin smiled and said, Then I'll go first. You keep an eye on these little guys and make sure they don't fight again. Daenerys nodded and said, Yes, I will watch, but they can't fight with Scorch here. After saying goodbye to Daenerys, Gavin walked towards the tunnel leading to the manor, and soon Gavin came to a dark, damp, mysterious secret room. A few rays of sunlight shone in from the narrow window high up, and dust flew in the light. The walls of the secret room were covered with all kinds of strange instruments and maps, and bottles and jars with strange smells were piled up in the corners. Coben's face was solemn, and his hands were trembling slightly as he carefully unscrewed an old lid. Instantly, a pungent smell came to his face, and he saw a green viscous liquid inside. Under the slanting sunlight, the surface of the liquid was shining with a strange luster. Coben raised his head and looked at Gavin beside him, and said in a slightly low voice, Sir, this is wildfire. Gavin frowned and stared at the mysterious liquid, his expression full of curiosity and vigilance. Coben took a deep breath and continued, Sir, this wildfire is extremely dangerous. It can be easily ignited even at high temperatures. Its power is terrifying. Once ignited, it will be a raging flame that is almost impossible to extinguish. After saying this, Coben's eyes revealed a hint of awe. Gavin thought for a moment and said, Get a kin, find an open place, and let's try it. Coben said worriedly, Sir, the flames formed by wildfires are different from ordinary flames. Are you sure you can control them? Gavin said confidently, Don't worry, even if I can't control it, it won't harm me. The two then headed towards the beach with a kin of wildfire. Chapter 106 Yedge Island Naval Port. At the seaside, the wind whistles and the waves beat against the rocks. Gavin found an empty beach, placed the wildfire kin on the ground, unscrewed the lid, and the two of them quickly moved away. Coben watched nervously from the side, beads of sweat oozing from his forehead. Gavin took a deep breath and prepared to light the wildfire. Gavin raised his hand, and a ball of blazing flames flew out quickly, like an arrow from a bow, rushing towards the wildfire kin in the distance. In an instant, the wildfire kin was ignited, and with a loud bang, the kin exploded instantly. In an instant, green flames gushed out like a demon, spreading wildly, and the small kin of wildfire actually covered an area of more than 10 square meters. The flames burned fiercely, making crackling sounds, as if they were going to devour everything around them. Gavin's mind moved, and he began to control the flames. His brows were furrowed, and his eyes were focused and sharp. As he controlled it, the flames seemed to be driven by some mysterious force, and began to explode more violently, and the range continued to expand. The originally raging flames seemed to be given life, becoming more ferocious and violent. Seeing this amazing effect, Gavin laughed, his smile full of pride and excitement. He turned to Coben, who was already dumbfounded, and asked, how many cans of wildfire do we have now? Coben finally recovered from his shock and stammered, Sir, there are probably hundreds of cans at present. After hearing this, he immediately said, Order some more wildfires, the more the better. Coben quickly responded, As you wish, sir. However, the transportation of wildfire is quite dangerous. The alchemists must be extra careful during the transportation process and not transport too much at a time. Gavin nodded seriously and said, Send more ships and remember to pay attention to safety during transportation. After saying that, Gavin looked at the still burning wildfire again, his eyes full of anticipation, as if he had already seen the scene of defeating the enemy with this powerful wildfire. Lys is one of the 9 free trade cities, located on the southern coast of Essos, southeast of Tyrosh and west of Volantis. It spans 3 islands and part of the coastal area of Essos. It has a cool climate, abundant sunshine, fertile land, abundant palm and fruit tree vegetation, turquoise ocean, and abundant fish. Lys was a city built on a rock, located on the island of Lys, and was ruled by a council of governors, who were chosen from among the wealthiest men in the city. Governor Byron Haywood was born in poverty, and he did whatever it took to get rich. He was ruthless and initially colluded with pirates, using the pirates' power to gain population and accumulate original capital. In the slave trade, he used all cruel means to suppress his opponents without mercy. With this, his wealth increased dramatically. He not only expanded the scale of slave trading, but also got involved in training management, and his business became more and more prosperous. In the end, he was elected governor of Rees with his amazing wealth, but his ruthless style never changed. Since Lys is mainly composed of islands, its navy is the strongest among the 3 daughter kingdoms. It has 3 ports and 92 warships, including 26 sailing warships. In addition to the regular soldiers on land, there are more than mercenaries. Although Yej Island is the smallest of the 3 islands in Lys, it has an extremely important position. The port on the island is the only military port in Lys, and there are 2 large shipyards. Since the San family joined Lys, they have also stopped docking their warships here. There is a military camp very close to the port to ensure that soldiers can board the ship quickly at any time. The island is covered with green trees and rolling mountains. Under the moonlight, the outlines are clear and mysterious. The hillsides are covered with dense vegetation, and the sea breeze blows gently, making branches and leaves sway and rustle. The tranquility of the night enveloped the land, with only the occasional chirping of insects breaking the silence. The harbour was another lively scene, with 70 warships neatly moored in the harbour, creating a spectacular sight. The 40 warships of the San family were in varying conditions. Some were brand new and sturdy, while others looked old and some were even refitted from merchant ships. The hulls of these warships were covered with traces of battle, as if telling of the fierce battles that had taken place there. Their bows have different shapes, some are sharp, some are slightly blunt, and the ballistae on the deck are also different, with different sizes and models. In stark contrast are the 30 warships of the Lys fleet, including 10 huge sailing warships, with huge sails on towering masts faintly visible in the moonlight. These sailing warships are magnificent, with solid hulls and exquisite decorations, showing the strong strength and exquisite craftsmanship of Lys. The remaining 20 or so ships were long ships with outstanding speed. Although they were shorter, they were smooth in shape, exquisitely designed, and incredibly fast. Their sidewalls were lower, making it easier for them to move flexibly during battles. The sea breeze gently blew across the naval port, and the warships swayed slightly with the waves. The ropes rubbed against each other, making a slight creaking sound, as if these warships were talking in their sleep. The moonlight sprinkled on the water, forming patches of silver light, jumping and flickering with the ups and downs of the waves. The entire naval port was immersed in a tense and peaceful atmosphere. These warships seemed to be waiting for an order, and then they would rush to the battlefield like an arrow from a bow, showing their great strength and fearless courage. Under the deep night, the sea was like an endless black silk, undulating slightly. A bright moon hung high in the sky, casting a cool light, illuminating this turbulent world. A standard warship flying the flag of Rees slowly sailed towards the military port of Nightsong Island. The warship looked shaky in the moonlight. The planks of the hull were broken in many places. Although it had been simply repaired, many broken parts were still clearly visible. A huge hole appeared at the stern, as if it had been hit hard by a sharp ram. Several holes were made on one side of the ship by the enemy's crossbow, and the edges were jagged. The statue on the bow was incomplete, having lost its former majesty and grace. The sail was badly damaged, riddled with holes from arrows, and it was almost impossible to move forward with the wind. The deck of the warship was crisscrossed with deep knife and sword scars. Although the blood had been washed away by the sea, the cruelty of the battle was still vivid. Although the warship did not sink, it was no longer glorious. Yet the masts of the warship still stood tall, and the flags of Lys fluttered in the night breeze. At this moment, a sailor on the deck held the steering wheel tightly, his eyes dull, and mechanically adjusted the direction according to the rhythm of the waves. His movements were stiff, as if driven by some invisible force. Another sailor was at the stern, pulling the ropes and controlling the sails with an expressionless face. They were silent, with only the whistling of the sea wind and the slapping of the waves filling the surroundings. Chapter 107, Burning the Military Port. A tall and solid lighthouse stands at the military port of Yej Island. The tower is made of rough stones and has been eroded by the sea wind, but it is still stable. The observation deck on the top of the tower has a wide view, and a soldier is concentrating on scanning the sea. The soldier's eyes were sharp, not missing any abnormality. Suddenly, he saw a ship approaching, and he became alert instantly. As the ship approached, he recognized the flag of Rees. Seeing the familiar flag, the soldier's tense nerves relaxed a little, thinking to himself, "It's Rees's ship, there should be no problem." However, as the warship approached, the soldier was surprised to find something strange about it. The warship was badly damaged. What was even more incredible to him was that there were only two figures operating on the huge deck. The soldier stared wide-eyed, trying to see the two men's movements, but they seemed unfamiliar and stiff, very different from the experienced sailors. The soldier frowned, and suddenly realized that this was Rees's warship that was attacked. This ship was escaped, and there must have been heavy casualties on the crew, so there were only two people operating it. Finally, the warship approached the entrance of the naval port. The lighthouse at the port emitted a bright light, guiding the ship into the safe harbor. The warship was getting closer and closer, and the soldier could clearly see the broken and tragic hull, as well as the shaky sails. His heartbeat began to speed up, and an ominous premonition came to his mind. The warship began to turn, as if it was inspecting the warships docked in the port, and it drew an arc and sailed horizontally in the port. The person controlling the sail on the ship stopped his work and began to lift a wooden barrel and throw it towards the docked ship. The barrel slammed heavily into the water, with only a small part exposed above the sea. It was obvious that the thing in the barrel was not light. As barrels were thrown down one after another, the soldiers who noticed something was wrong quickly sounded the alarm. Suddenly, the camp was brightly lit and noisy. The shouts of people, the clash of weapons, and the sound of hurried footsteps intertwined, breaking the tranquility of the night. Soldiers rushed out of their tents in a panic, some without even having time to put on their clothes. The generals shouted loudly, trying to sort out the chaotic situation. The light and shadows of torches swayed in the crowd, reflecting the tense and anxious faces. At this moment, suddenly a deafening roar came from the air. The sound seemed to tear the sky apart and made people tremble with fear. Upon hearing the sound, several sentry towers quickly blew special horns. The sound was shrill and rapid. As the horn sounded, the entire camp suddenly became more panicked, and fear spread rapidly like a plague. Several generals shouted at the top of their lungs, "The dragon is coming! The dragon is coming! Run to the boat and turn on the dragon hunting crossbow on the boat!" Their voices were almost hoarse in the chaos. "Get on board! Get on board!" Such shouts came one after another. The soldiers and others in the camp rushed frantically towards the ship docked at the port. The crowd was like a tide, pushing and crowding each other. Some people were pushed to the ground and trampled by countless feet in an instant, making miserable cries. The cries of children and the screams of women in the camp were mixed together, creating a doomsday scene. People ran desperately, holding their weapons tightly in their hands, their eyes full of fear, hoping to find a glimmer of hope under the attack of the dragon. At this moment, the damaged warship stopped throwing barrels into the water and drove at full speed towards the densest area of docked warships, showing no sign of slowing down, obviously not caring about its own safety. With people shouting in fear, there was a loud boom, and the damaged warship crashed into the middle of the crowded warships like an out-of-control beast. The huge impact force caused the surrounding warships to shake violently, and the sound of the wood planks breaking was crisp and harsh. Wood chips flew everywhere at the collision, like exploding fireworks. Some soldiers lost their balance and fell into the sea, splashing huge water. The warships that were hit had deep dents, their sides were broken, and sea water rushed in. The warships that were originally tightly arranged and docked suddenly became chaotic, squeezing and colliding with each other. Masts were broken, sails fell, and the whole place was in a mess. Cries, curses, and cries for help intertwined into a symphony of despair at this moment. The soldier who first sounded the alarm stood on a high place, overlooking the chaotic scene below and the damaged warships that were forced to stop due to the collision, and fear flashed involuntarily in his eyes. The two people on the deck stopped their actions, one of them slowly took a torch, and the other followed closely behind him and walked towards the cabin together. As they moved slowly, the soldier's ominous premonition became stronger, as if an invisible hand was tightly grasping his heart. Until the two figures completely disappeared in the cabin and their trace could no longer be seen on the deck, the soldier's heart sank to the bottom in an instant. A deep fear enveloped him, as if a huge disaster was about to befall. Gavin rode on Blazing Shadow, soaring in the night sky. He looked down at the Nightsong Island naval port below, which was brightly lit and in chaos. The crowd was surging like a swarm of ants, with shouts, footsteps, and the sound of metal colliding. Warships collided with each other, wood chips flew everywhere, and the sea was stirred into turbulent waves. A soldier ran onto the boat first, veins popping out of his hands. He first tore off the oilcloth covering the dragon hunting crossbow and threw it aside without hesitation. Then, he tightly grasped the wheel with both hands and shook it frantically with all his strength. Every turn was accompanied by heavy breathing, and the wheel made a creaking sound. After winding the string, he quickly took out a long crossbow arrow and carefully placed it in the crossbow slot. His movements were skillful and precise. At this moment, his expression became extremely focused. He quickly aimed the dragon hunting crossbow into the air, his eyes fixed on the dark sky. His gaze was so sharp that it seemed to be able to penetrate the endless night. He narrowed his eyes slightly, and his whole body entered a highly tense state of preparation for battle. Finally, most of the soldiers successfully boarded the docked warship. They acted quickly, opening their dragon hunting crossbows one after another, their eyes tense and focused, carefully searching for their targets in the dark sky. At this moment, the scene was a little quiet, like the brief calm before the storm. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the unknown danger to come. Suddenly, without any warning, the damaged warship exploded violently. In an instant, a dazzling green flame gushed out like a demon, and then swallowed everything around it. Chapter 108. Escape intact. The powerful shock wave caused by the wildfire explosion spread in all directions, and the hot air waves made the air scalding hot. Then, the barrels floating on the sea were ignited one by the spreading wildfire, as if they were a string of firecrackers being lit one after another. Boom! 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 The continuous explosions were deafening, and each explosion burst into green flames, like flowers of death blooming on the sea. The fire spread rapidly, sweeping all the ships in the harbor with an unstoppable force. The fire burned fiercely, lighting up the night sky like day. The warship's planks burned and twisted under the high temperature, making a terrifying crackling sound. The screams, cries of terror and explosions mixed together to create a tragic scene of hell on earth. Soldiers struggled in the sea of fire, their skin was burned and their clothes turned to ashes in an instant. Some tried to jump into the sea to escape, but were hit by burning wooden boards and sank into the sea of fire. The entire port fell into chaos and despair. The flames raged, ruthlessly destroying everything, as if to completely wipe out the military port of Yedge Island from the world. Gavin was in the air when he saw the horrific scene of the wildfire exploding below. He was deeply shocked and gained a new understanding of the power of wildfire. Taking advantage of the opportunity brought by the explosion, he immediately patted Jia Ying's neck. Jia Ying in the air understood what he meant and immediately dived towards the port below. As he got closer to the wildfire burning below, heat waves rolled in. Gavin concentrated his energy and slowly reached out to try to control the raging flames. Boom! The flames became more violent in an instant, like a violent beast, spreading madly towards the port. The ships that had survived before were also set on fire, and the flames even surged onto the shore. Just a moment later, the blazing shadow quickly rose into the air and flew away. Gavin now had a splitting headache and was sweating all over, so he had to stop controlling the flame. He felt extremely tired and weak. This huge flame was simply not something he could easily control at this stage. But just this moment of control also made the results of the battle more fruitful. The fire in the port became more and more fierce, the crackling sound of burning warships was endless, and thick smoke billowed into the sky. The seemingly solid defense was vulnerable to this wildfire. With a roar, the blazing shadow, without the threat of the dragon hunting crossbow, dived toward the port again. Its huge body carried the strong wind, flying at a low altitude, and rushed swiftly towards the soldiers who were lucky enough not to board the ship or escape to the shore. Dragon flame! With Gavin's command, the scorching dragon flame immediately gushed out. The flame poured down on the port like a torrent, and wherever it went, it became a sea of fire. Jia Ying spewed out dragon flames again and again, causing this horrific disaster to continue to spread. Instantly, screams of people rang out one after another. Help! Run! People below were running for their lives in panic, and the shouts were deafening. Some officers tried to organize resistance, but in the face of this overwhelming force, everything seemed so powerless. Some soldiers tried to jump into the water to survive, but were frightened by the raging wildfire on the water and could only wander on the shore in despair. The port had become a living hell, with charred bodies and burning wreckage everywhere. The place that was once full of life now only had the smell of death and despair. Gavin rode on Jia Ying's back and watched all this with indifference. There was no mercy in his eyes, only a firm determination to win. Suddenly, a crossbow arrow whizzed over from a sentry tower on the island. Just as the crossbow arrow was about to approach, the sharp-eyed Jia Ying seemed to sense the danger. It suddenly turned sideways, and swung its huge wings vigorously, bringing up a gust of wind. The swift movement seemed to tear the air apart. The crossbow arrow flew past its body, barely missing it by a millimeter. However, with the appearance of this crossbow arrows were shot one after another from different directions, piercing the night sky with a terrifying sound of breaking through the air. Apparently, the Reese people also deployed a lot of dragon hunting crossbows on the shore. At this time, Gavin had already gained enough results, and seeing that the situation was beginning to become unfavorable to him, he decisively ordered the blazing shadow to take off. The blazing shadow raised its head and whistled loudly, flapping its wings rapidly, creating a whirlwind with its powerful force. Its body shot up into the sky like a rocket, instantly escaping the attack range of the crossbow arrows. Gavin flew high in the sky and saw that the sea on the other side of Liss Island was brightly lit. Obviously, the huge movement on the naval port side had attracted the attention of the other side. Gavin patted Jia Ying lightly, and Jia Ying understood and immediately turned around and flew into the dark night sky. The port at this time looked like a doomsday scene. The raging fire was still raging, lighting up the entire port as bright as day. Thick smoke rose up, covering the sky and the moon. The warship gradually collapsed and sank in the sea of fire, making a dull cracking sound. Burnt wooden boards, broken weapons, and countless soldiers' bodies floated on the sea, and the sea was dyed black with blood and ashes. Those soldiers who failed to escape struggled and wailed in pain in the sea of fire, and were eventually devoured by the merciless flames, turning into charred corpses. The smell of burning, blood, and gunpowder mixed together and made people sick. The once prosperous military port has now become a ruin, which looks even more tragic and desolate against the backdrop of the night, as if it is a cursed place of death. At dawn, the sky was just getting light, and the hazy morning light cast a veil over the sea. On the vast sea, a huge fleet appeared, sailing steadily in the waves like a moving fortress. The fleet was composed entirely of tall sailing ships, their masts towering into the clouds and their huge sails fluttering in the breeze. The rising sun shines on the white canvas, creating a golden glow. The battleship's hull is solid and majestic, and its wooden shell has been carefully polished and processed, exuding an ancient and majestic atmosphere. The fleet lined up neatly, breaking through the waves, the bows splitting the white waves, leaving long water marks. The sea breeze blew, the flags fluttered, making a fluttering sound, interweaving with the sound of the waves and the creaking of the ships, forming a magnificent ocean symphony. With a loud dragon roar, the soldiers of the Belarus quickly cleared the deck. Soon, they saw a blazing shadow flying towards the Belarus. The huge body cast a huge shadow in the morning light and slowly descended with unparalleled pressure. The powerful wings of the blazing shadow flapped, creating gusts of wind that rustled the soldiers' clothes. When its claws touched the broad deck at the bow, the entire warship trembled slightly. It raised its head and let out a low roar, as if announcing its presence to the sea. Chapter 109. Reese's response. Gavin jumped off Jia Ying's back. His figure was light but he was tired after the battle. Hassan, who had been waiting here, hurried over as soon as he saw Gavin land, his face full of eagerness and respect. "Sir, what are the results of this battle?" Hassan bowed slightly and asked in a very respectful tone. Gavin looked a little tired, but there was still a gleam of victory in his eyes. The power of the wildfire is indeed beyond imagination. All the warships in the Night Song Island naval port have been burned. He paused, frowned slightly, and then said, "Unfortunately, there are not many wildfires left now, and this opportunity to surprise the enemy is only this once." Hassan said quickly, "That's good too, sir. There are less than 70 warships in Rees now, and they are definitely no match for us in a naval battle." He raised his head, his eyes full of concern. "You haven't rested all night, go back to your room and get some sleep. I'll keep an eye on it here. It is estimated that the fleet will arrive in Rees tomorrow." Gavin nodded and walked towards the cabin with slightly heavy steps. After returning to the room, he collapsed on the bed. However, his tired body did not stop his thoughts. He lay on the bed and thought quietly about his plan. In this attack on Lys, the fleet of the Stepstones was almost fully deployed. Gavin decisively divided the fleet into two, and the 60 huge sailing warships, like brave beasts, were the main force heading straight to Lys Island, responsible for destroying Lys fleet and capturing the city of Lys. The remaining 30 or so longships were tasked with buying time. They had to block the sea links between Lys, Tyrosh and Mir as much as possible, so as to delay the opponent's reaction time and buy more time for themselves. According to the accurate intelligence obtained earlier, Rees' fleet docked its ships at 3 ports. Therefore, Gavin first cleverly used the Rees-style longship that he had seized when he captured Rees' envoy, and carefully planned a night attack. He filled the longboat with wildfire, and under the cover of night, he first burned down the largest military port in Rees and its warships, and at the same time destroyed the warships of the Thorn family that might help. Now it seemed that the first step of the plan was extremely successful. Next, as long as Gavin could quickly destroy the remaining fleet of Lys and successfully capture the island of Lys before Tyrosh and Mir could react, he would be able to win the war. By then, faced with the inevitable outcome, Tyrosh and Mir would probably not dare to act rashly, even if they were unwilling, and could only acquiesce to the fact that Gavin had taken Lys. Governor Rees's palace. When Governor Rees, Byron Haywood, learned the tragic news that the naval port and warships on Night Song Island had been burnt down, his rage instantly erupted like a raging volcano, and the furious force seemed to devour everything around it. "A bunch of trash!" He cursed his men at the top of his lungs. His angry voice echoed in the huge room for a long time, so loud that it seemed to make the walls tremble. He paced back and forth in the room rapidly like a wild beast that had lost its mind. His eyes were bloodshot and so red that it was frightening, and his face was so gloomy that it seemed as if ink could drip out of it. However, after the rage like a storm subsided a little, worry and fear surged into his heart like a raging tide. He never thought that the dragon would have such a terrifying power. The destructive power that could destroy everything in its path made him feel timid. His body trembled slightly, and beads of cold sweat kept coming out of his forehead and sliding down his cheeks. He couldn't help but think in his heart, did the faceless man fail? Why hasn't Gavin died yet? What the hell are the Black and White House doing? Can Rees stop such a powerful force? The eyes that were originally firm and confident were now filled with confusion and uneasiness. "Convene a governor's meeting immediately." Byron Haywood gave orders in a nearly roaring voice. "All warships are to leave the port and assemble without any delay." He forced himself to roar and give orders again. Although his tone was still too tough to allow for any doubt, when listened carefully, it was clear that he lacked some of his previous confidence. "Pass on my order and have the weapon craftsmen work overtime day and night to make the dragon hunting crossbows. We must produce a sufficient number of dragon hunting crossbows in the shortest possible time to prepare for emergencies." His words were quick and powerful. Then, he suddenly shouted to the terrified servant beside him, "Send a letter to Tyrosh and Mir immediately. I demand a meeting of the 3 cities alliance." The atmosphere in the room was extremely depressing, as if even the air had frozen, and it was so heavy that it was almost impossible to breathe. And Governor Byron Haywood's heart was now tightly entangled with anger, worry, and fear, like a giant net that could not be escaped. After Byron Haywood's order was issued, the whole of Rees seemed to be ignited in an instant. At the port, the remaining 61 warships moved quickly, with their sails hoisted high and flapping in the sea breeze. Soldiers were busy shuttling between them, wearing neatly equipped equipment and looking solemn and nervous. Warships slowly sailed out of the harbor one after another. The oars on both sides of the ship rose and fell in unison, hitting the sea surface and splashing white waves. The sea breeze was filled with a tense atmosphere, and the masts of the warships cast long shadows in the sunlight. At the same time, 2 specially designated ships sped off like arrows from a bow, heading towards Tyrosh and Mir respectively. Their bows split the waves, and their sterns left wide streaks of water. The sails were filled to the brim by the wind, and they were moving at full speed, as if carrying this last hope. In the city of Rees, soldiers came and went, carrying weapons and supplies. The sound of clanging could be heard from the blacksmith shop, as they made final preparations for the war. The entire city was shrouded in a tense atmosphere of preparation for war, waiting for an unknown fate. The next morning, the sky was as blue as a gem, without a single cloud in sight, and the sun shone down unhindered. The sea was as calm as a mirror, with only a few ripples when the breeze blew gently. The 61 remaining warships of Rees were lined up neatly on the sea, their hulls rising and falling slightly with the waves. However, in sharp contrast to this seemingly peaceful scene, the atmosphere on the ship was extremely depressing. The soldiers stood on the deck, their postures were upright, but their eyes revealed deep worry and fear, and their tightly grasped weapons could not suppress their inner uneasiness. The sea breeze caressed their faces and ruffled their hair, but it could not dispel the depressing atmosphere that permeated the air. The soldiers were all silent, with only the sound of waves hitting the side of the ship and a few occasional low sighs. Chapter 110. Naval Battle 1. Fleming was a 16-year-old boy who had just joined the Rees Navy. His young face was like a newly blossomed flower, yet full of vigor and vitality. Thanks to his father's generous donation and his willingness to spend money to smooth relationships, Fleming finally succeeded in obtaining a relatively safe lookout position on the ship. Perhaps it was because of his youthful vigor, or perhaps it was because of his deep yearning for the sea. Fleming, who was alone on the lookout pole, was not completely affected by the depressing atmosphere of the group below. Although he was a little nervous, he was relatively calm. Sometimes he looked out at the boundless sea, feeling the breath of freedom brought by the sea breeze. Sometimes he looked down at the busy and messy port of Rees, watching the hurried figures of the people. Suddenly, his eyes fixed on the distant sea level. At first, it was just a tiny black dot, almost imperceptible against the blue background. Gradually, the half-sail above the sea level slowly appeared, tearing the tranquility of the sea level. Then, like stars, countless black dots appeared on the distant sea level one after another, becoming clearer and clearer. Fleming was stunned for a moment, his mind went blank for a moment, until a sharp and high-pitched horn sounded from the warship next to him, and he woke up as if from a dream, and reacted instantly. Then, he immediately blew the horn in his hand. Accompanied by a series of warning horn sounds, a huge fleet slowly appeared in his sight like a behemoth. Under the clear sky, the sun is shining brightly, there are no clouds in the sky, and the calm sea is like a huge piece of blue silk. The Belleris led the fleet through the waves, the bow splitting the white waves like a sharp blade cutting through the sea. The hull rose and fell with the waves, the rhythm was powerful and steady. The sails were filled with wind, as if they wanted to break free from the restraints of the ropes and stretch out to the distance. Gavin stood at the bow of the Belleris, looking calmly at the increasingly clear Rees Island in the distance and the Rees fleet that had already formed a formation on the sea. His expression was calm and resolute, without any nervousness or panic. Then Gavin nodded calmly to Hassan beside him. Hassan immediately understood what he meant. After bowing, he quickly turned around with a solemn expression and shouted loudly, "Blow the battle horn, and the entire fleet is ready to meet the enemy. All ships adjust the angle of the sails." The sharp and passionate sound of the horn instantly pierced the calmness of the sea, like a thunder that shook the earth and suddenly exploded in the air. The loud trumpet sound carried endless fighting spirit, as if it could tear the sky apart. The warships moved quickly and in an orderly manner. The crew members were agile and skilled. They quickly adjusted the angle of the sails, pulled the ropes flexibly with both hands, and accurately manipulated the masts to allow the sails to fully face the sea breeze. Under their delicate operation, the ship changed its course flexibly, like a nimble fish swimming among the waves. The entire fleet quickly changed its formation, like a huge and flexible beast dancing gracefully on the sea, showing amazing coordination and tacit understanding. Boxes of specially made crossbows were quickly lifted out of the cabin, the heavy wooden boxes standing out on the soldiers' strong shoulders. The soldiers struggled to tear open the rainproof tarpaulin wrapped around the crossbow, and the hideous image that was originally hidden underneath was instantly revealed. The strong soldiers worked together to turn the wheel, and with heavy breathing and low trumpet calls, they steadily wound the crossbow. Each turn was full of power, as if accumulating destructive energy. At the same time, the archers were organizing their equipment in an orderly manner. With focused expressions, they carefully checked the tension of the bowstrings, gently plucked the bowstrings with their fingers, and felt the slight vibrations to ensure that the bowstrings were in the best condition. They carefully selected the right arrows, the sharp arrowheads flashing coldly in the sun. Then they put the bowstrings firmly on them, put the tails of the arrows against their cheeks, their eyes dangerous and sharp. The soldiers gripped their weapons tightly, their bodies tense as if they were fully drawn bowstrings, their muscles trembling slightly, revealing their inner tension and anticipation. Gavin's face was stern, as calm as an iceberg. He quickly put on his fine armor, which shone brightly in the sun, and each piece of armor seemed to contain infinite power. He tightly grasped the powerful dragon bone bow and turned over to sit on the broad and solid dragon back of Jieying. The blazing shadow, which had been quietly lying on the bow of the Belaris, now felt Gavin's passionate fighting spirit and fierce killing intent. Its huge and strong body trembled slightly, like a volcano about to erupt. The violent flames of battle ignited in its eyes, as if it wanted to burn all enemies to ashes. Following Gavin's low command, Blazing Shadow suddenly spread its huge wings that covered the sky and the sun and flapped them vigorously. In an instant, a strong wind blew up, making the clothes of the people around rustle and their hair flutter wildly. Then, Blazing Shadow took Gavin from the bow of the Belaris and rushed into the sky like a flash of lightning, so fast that people could only see it flashing before their eyes. Its agile figure shone with a mysterious and majestic light under the sunlight, like a god of war descending from the sky. The Blazing Shadow flew higher and higher, its powerful wings beating the air, making thunderous sounds that shook everyone's heart. Gavin sat firmly on the Blazing Shadow's back, looking down at the sea below with a cold gaze, which seemed to be able to penetrate all the fog. At the same time, the Reese fleet also came over here. The bows of the warships split the waves, splashing high water, like the white fangs of a giant beast. The atmosphere on the sea suddenly became extremely tense, as if even the air was about to freeze. Hassan was on the Belaris, looking at the approaching enemy. He took a deep breath and shouted to the soldiers, loyal soldiers of the Belaris family. We are here to conquer the unjust Reese. Summon your courage, keep your reason, and may the gods bless this army with a sacred goal. Attack for victory, for the stepstones, and for Gavin Belaris. His voice was like a loud bell, echoing on the sea, stirring the hearts of every soldier and making their blood boil instantly. Following Hassan's roar, Gavin's fleet rushed towards the Reese fleet like a surging wave with an unstoppable momentum. More than a dozen sailing warships stretched out their oars on both sides and quickly accelerated, like wild horses running wild, rushing past the Belaris in front of them at lightning speed, and bravely rushing towards the enemy with an indomitable determination. Chapter 111. Naval Battle 2. As the warships of both sides approached, a tense atmosphere filled the air like a thick fog that could not be dissolved. Gavin's crossbows took advantage of their range to launch an attack first, and the dense crossbow arrows were like locusts covering the sky, shooting towards the Reese fleet with a sharp whistling sound. The warships at the front of the Reese fleet were instantly covered by crossbow arrows, wood chips flew everywhere like snowflakes, huge and hideous holes appeared on the sides of the ships, and sea water poured in like a ferocious beast. The Reese fleet was not to be outdone. Despite the fierce attack, it roared and quickly closed the distance with Gavin's fleet, and fired powerful dragon-hunting crossbows to fight back. For a moment, crossbows crossed in the sky, colliding like black lightning, and the air was filled with a chilling whistling sound. The sailing ship relied on its huge size to withstand the attack, but under the devastating power of the dragon-hunting crossbow, wood chips flew everywhere for a while, as if it was torn apart by an invisible giant hand. Suddenly, a giant crossbow arrow shot from a crossbow stabbed at the deck of the Reese warship like a demon spear from hell. There was a deafening sound, and the crossbow arrow instantly penetrated the guard plate with unstoppable violent force, and a bloody passage was instantly formed on the deck wherever it passed. More than a dozen soldiers on this straight line didn't even have time to scream before they were pierced by this powerful force. Blood spurted out like a fountain, and broken limbs flew out. The area that was originally full of soldiers was instantly empty. The bloody and terrifying scene was horrifying. A sailing warship, with its powerful ram and solid and huge hull, like an extremely angry beast, rammed directly into a Reese longship that was tilted due to water intake. There was a soul-tearing roar, and the solid ram instantly tore the longship in two. Broken planks and broken parts flew everywhere like fireworks, and huge waves suddenly rose on the sea, towering like mountain peaks. The Reese soldiers on the ship fell into the water like fallen leaves, and cries for help and screams rose one after another, interweaving into a song of despair and sorrow. Some warships were close to the range of arrows, and the archers on both sides instantly entered combat mode. Gavin's side took the lead and quickly launched a dense rain of arrows at the other side. Arrows like locusts were shot at the deck of the other warship, and the momentum seemed to swallow everything. The Reese soldiers did not react in time and failed to raise their shields for protection, and were instantly hit hard. The screams of the soldiers were like sharp swords piercing people's hearts, and the heavy casualties were unbearable to watch. The surviving Reese archers quickly adjusted their status, with unyielding rage burning in their eyes. They pulled their bowstrings to their full potential, aiming at the soldiers of Gavin's fleet, and shot out sharp arrows one after another. Some of the arrows accurately hit the soldiers of Gavin's side, causing them to fall to the ground instantly, and their lives disappeared in an instant. The Reese archers continued to fire arrows, trying to reverse the almost hopeless situation. For a while, the two sides shot at each other, and the rain of arrows collided in the air. But the warships of both sides were still getting closer. The soldiers holding shields tightly grasped their weapons, their muscles tense, their eyes determined, waiting for the moment of boarding, their hearts filled with determination to fight. At this time, the battle between the two sides began to enter a white-hot stage. Most of the warships were entangled together. The Belarus, with its powerful and sturdy huge hull, was like an unstoppable steel fortress, roaring into the dense battlefield. Wherever it went, the waves were raised several feet high, like a huge white wall collapsing. The loud noise made by the collision between the tall hull and the Reese warship seemed to break the sky, and the whole world was trembling in this shock. The tall ship continuously fired rain of arrows in the surroundings, so densely that it seemed to cover the sky. Taking advantage of the chaotic situation in which both fleets were entangled, Gavin swooped down on the blazing shadow and instantly cut into the chaotic battlefield. Some crossbowmen on Reese's side saw the flying dragon, their hearts suddenly shrank, and they hurriedly tried to adjust the direction of the dragon-hunting crossbow. However, they were disturbed by the dense rain of arrows from Gavin's fleet. The dense rain of arrows made the Reese crossbowmen flustered, their hands trembling, and they could not concentrate on operating the dragon-hunting crossbows. When Gavin rode Blazing Shadow close to the battlefield, only 2 or 3 dragon-hunting crossbows were successfully fired. But Blazing Shadow flexibly flapped its huge and powerful wings and easily dodged these attacks with graceful and agile movements. Gavin immediately pulled the keelbow to full strength to fight back, his eyes were sharp as a torch, aiming at a Reese warship that had just fired a crossbow. The flaming arrow flew out like a meteor burning with the fire of revenge, and accurately hit the dragon-hunting crossbow. With a violent explosion, the entire dragon-hunting crossbow was blown to pieces, and parts flew everywhere. The nearby Reese soldiers also flew blood and flesh in the explosion, and their limbs were broken. The rest of the soldiers immediately fell into panic, their eyes filled with endless fear. The Blazing Shadow immediately flew over the warship, opened its huge and majestic dragon mouth, and spewed out surging dragon flames. In an instant, the opponent's deck turned into a sea of fire, and the scorching heat seemed to ignite the air. The soldiers screamed miserably in this terrifying heat, and in just a moment, the originally dense crowd was emptied. The raging flames burned violently, and the sails and ropes were quickly ignited. The fire was fierce, spreading wantonly on the warships of the Reese fleet like a demon. Afterwards, the Blazing Shadow did not rise into the air, but rushed forward, spraying dragon flames at the Lys warship next to it. The huge impact force and scorching heat instantly caused a terrifying hole to appear on the side of the Lys warship. The blazing flames rushed into the cabin like a beast, burning everything inside mercilessly. The flames even burst out wildly from the cracks in the deck, and the entire warship was engulfed by the rapidly burning fire in an instant. With the help of all the sailing warships and dragon flames, Gavin's side had an overwhelming advantage over Reese's fleet. The flames of war were raging, the smoke was billowing, and the sea was in chaos and noise. Screams, shouts of killing, and the sound of ships breaking were intertwined, like the music of hell. Some of Gavin's soldiers could no longer hold back their passion for battle, their eyes were red with desire for battle, they leaped out of their own warships, agile and fearless, bravely jumping onto the deck of Reese's warship, vowing to start a fierce boarding battle, determined to seize the other side's warship. Kill! The soldiers on Gavin's side roared, their weapons flashing a chilling light in the sun, which seemed to reflect their belief in victory. The soldiers of the Reese fleet did not flinch either. Although they were filled with fear, they still gritted their teeth and resisted the surging attack, showing their final tenacity. Chapter 112. Naval Battle 3. The soldiers on the deck were instantly caught in a bloody melee, with swords clashing and dazzling sparks bursting out, like gorgeous fireworks blooming in the night sky. The figures of the soldiers intertwined in the firelight and smoke, and every collision was a contest of life and death. Blood kept splattering, staining the wooden boards under their feet red, making the originally hard deck slippery and dangerous. Gavin rode on the blazing shadow, circling and diving at low altitude. Every dive was like the arrival of the god of fire, and he would inevitably destroy an enemy ship. The flaming arrows in his hand shot out again and again, accurately hitting the dragon hunting crossbow, and each arrow carried the power of destruction. The dragon flames in blazing shadow's mouth were like the fire of doom, ruthlessly destroying the warships of the Reese fleet. Under this powerful offensive, the resistance of the Reese navy gradually collapsed, and the eyes of the soldiers were filled with despair and helplessness. Some of the burning Lys warships began to lose control, colliding with each other in the chaos, setting other warships on fire. Broken planks and broken masts fell into the sea like falling stars, splashing huge water. The setting sun was as red as blood, like a layer of thick plasma pouring over the entire sea surface, dyeing it shockingly. This fierce and long naval battle lasted a whole day and gradually subsided at dusk. The shattered wreckage of the warships was like the torn limbs of a giant beast, scattered all over the surging sea. Many of the wreckages were still burning with raging fires, and billowing black smoke rose up like a ferocious dragon, contrasting with the blood-red sunset in the sky, forming a hellish scene. The charred planks, broken masts and twisted metal collided violently with each other under the fierce impact of the surging waves, making a dull and heavy sound, as if it was the unwilling wail of the battlefield. The blood continuously flowed into the sea, dyeing large areas of the water crimson. This mixed with the billowing black smoke and burning flames, emitting a creepy and pungent smell. Corpses were floating in all directions, some were even half sunk and half floating, their faces were frozen at the last moment of their lives, some were filled with fear, some were filled with pain, some were in deep despair. The sea breeze whistled and swept in, carrying with it a strong and pungent smell of burning and a nauseating smell of blood, as if it were the breath of death, making people almost suffocate. The once indestructible and majestic warships were now mostly dilapidated, with their sides torn beyond recognition and their sails shattered like fallen leaves in the wind. Gawain won the naval battle at the cost of 5 warships, while Rhys's fleet suffered a devastating blow. Except for 5 longships that escaped by virtue of their speed advantage, the rest of the ships were either captured or ruthlessly sunk. There was a dead silence on the sea, with only broken wreckage and floating corpses bearing witness to the deep mark left by this extremely tragic battle. Governor Rhys, Byron Haywood, stood on the high city wall, looking at the sea in the distance that had just experienced a naval battle. His face was as pale as paper, and his body was shaking uncontrollably. His eyes were full of fear and despair, as if his soul had been taken away. The sea surface that he once knew well has now become a purgatory of death, which makes his heart sink into an endless abyss. He holds the edge of the wall tightly with both hands, and his knuckles turn white due to excessive force. The sea breeze blows across his face, but it cannot calm the turbulent waves in his heart. He knew that the fleet had suffered such a tragic destruction, which meant that his position and power were in jeopardy. The fate of the future was like the sea full of wreckage and corpses, full of unknowns and dangers. He seemed to see the angry eyes of the people and hear the cheers of the enemy's victory. All of this was like a sharp knife, piercing his heart. Fear followed him like a shadow, tightly wrapped around his thoughts. He deeply regretted hiring the faceless man and provoking Gavin, and was worried about the other party's reckoning. Cold sweat continued to seep from his forehead, but he was unaware of it. He just stared blankly at the horrible sea, falling into deep fear and regret. After simply cleaning up the battlefield, Gavin immediately sent out envoys to persuade the island to surrender. At the same time, the fleet quickly blocked the sea off the island of Lys, completely cutting off Lys's contact with the outside world. Warships were deployed closely around the island, like a steel wall, blocking all possible passages. On the sea, flaming flags fluttered in the wind, warning that any attempt to break through the blockade would end in failure. The next day, as the news of the sea blockade reached the city, the people in the city fell into extreme panic. They could already imagine the scene that would follow. The supply lines of materials were cut off, trade stagnated, and life instantly fell into hardship. Some people in the city who had relatives in the navy were getting more and more anxious. Their eyes were red and swollen, they cried and shouted hysterically, and rushed towards the governor's mansion like a surging tide. The noisy sound was like a storm, and it surrounded the governor's mansion in an instant. The gate of the governor's mansion was closed, but this could not stop the anger of the people. They banged on the gate, their fists rained down, and they kept shouting the names of their relatives, demanding that the governor give them an explanation. "My husband is on the front line, his life or death is uncertain, how can you just sit there and do nothing?" A woman's face was covered with tears and her voice was hoarse. My son is still so young, he can't just disappear like this. An old man was leaning on a cane, his body trembling. At this time, the door of the governor's mansion slowly opened, and an official walked out. With a solemn look on his face, he tried to calm the excited people, but his voice was instantly drowned out by the noise of the crowd. The people pressed forward step by step, and the official retreated helplessly, and the scene fell into chaos for a while. In the governor's mansion, Byron Haywood stood in front of the window, staring blankly at the crowd that surrounded the governor's mansion tightly. The despair in his heart was like a heavy rock, becoming so heavy that he could hardly breathe. One of his confidants hurriedly walked towards him, not even caring about the usual etiquette. He said in a panic and anxious manner, "Governor Byron, something bad has happened. Councillor Alec just convened the governor's council without telling you, and he also brought the envoy sent by Gavin to persuade us to surrender." Byron Haywood's face turned pale in an instant. His eyes widened, and his eyeballs seemed to bulge out of their sockets. He roared in disbelief, "That damn Alec has always coveted my position. I didn't expect him to be so bold as to convene a parliament without telling me. I swear, Alec, I will kill you sooner or later." Chapter 113. Chaos of Reese 1. The confidant's voice was very low, and his facial muscles were twitching slightly with tension. "My lord, the situation is worse than we imagined. In the parliament, the captive brought by the envoy actually revealed that you hired the faceless man to assassinate Gavin. Now all the parliamentarians are furious and angry. They all believe that it is because of your behavior that Reese suffered this cruel war. The situation has completely gotten out of control. My lord, you must find a solution quickly." Byron Haywood's body shook violently, and he stumbled, almost collapsing to the ground. He grasped the armrest of the chair in panic, his knuckles turning white from the force, and tried desperately to calm himself down. "What should I do?" "Quick, go and bring my team of unsullied guards, surround the council hall for me, and no one is allowed to leave without my order. I will go over and deal with it now." Byron Haywood rushed to the Parliament Hall in a hurry. His steps were quick and heavy, the muscles on his face were tense, and his eyes revealed panic and anger. The members of the Governor's Council were all wealthy businessmen and high-ranking military officers from Reese. Due to the destruction of the fleet, nearly half of the council members were missing at this time, and the usually crowded council hall had become much emptier. As Byron Haywood pushed open the heavy door of the Parliament Hall, everyone in the hall turned their eyes to the governor who suddenly came here, and suddenly became quiet. Everyone stared at him closely, and some people's eyes were filled with uncontrollable anger. Byron Haywood entered the Parliament Hall with firm steps, pushed away the people blocking his way without any hesitation, and walked straight to the center of the hall. He pretended to be calm, glanced at everyone fiercely, and then shouted loudly, "Members of the Parliament, please listen to me. This is entirely Gavin Bellerus's conspiracy. He wants to invade our free Rees and plunder our wealth. For this reason, he deliberately sent people to frame me, just to find a legitimate reason for his troops. Don't believe it. We should unite as one and fight against this evil Dragon King together." Then he immediately encouraged everyone, saying, "You don't have to worry too much about the safety of Liss. Even if we lose our navy, Liss still has 2,000 standing soldiers and more than 3,000 standing mercenaries. Moreover, there are countless mercenaries in the city, and we can hire them at any time. With Gavin Bellerus's current military strength, he can't even think of breaking into Liss. I have already sent messengers to Tyrosh and Mir for help. Once the fleets of both sides arrive, it will be the end of Gavin Bellerus. Then we can retake the stepstones again." Although his voice trembled slightly, he still tried to appear tough and resolute. After listening to his speech, everyone began to whisper to each other, and the Parliament Hall returned to its noisy and bustling state. However, some congressmen did not buy it. One of them stood up, pointed his finger at Byron Haywood, and angrily accused him, "Byron Haywood, we are discussing your issue now. The evidence is irrefutable, and you are still trying to quibble? It is because of your selfish desires that Rees was plunged into the flames of war. Countless naval soldiers died innocently, and Rees is now in danger." The congressman's condemnation was like turning on a switch. In a moment, countless accusations were heard. However, some congressmen who supported Byron Haywood spoke up to defend him. A fierce quarrel broke out between the two sides, and the atmosphere in the Parliament Hall suddenly became extremely tense. At this time, Congressman Alec walked quickly to the center, raised his hands and pressed them down to signal everyone to be quiet. Then he looked at Byron Haywood with cold eyes and sneered, "Governor Byron, your crimes are obvious and cannot be covered up. It was you who provoked the Dragon King and dragged Rhys into the abyss of war. Today you must give everyone a satisfactory explanation." Then he looked around at everyone and said loudly, "I propose that, in view of Governor Byron's serious incompetence, Byron Haywood's position as governor should be immediately removed, and he should be handed over to calm the Dragon King's anger." Byron Haywood's eyes were wide open, veins popped out on his neck, and he roared, "Alec, you traitor! How dare you convene the parliament without the governor's permission? I haven't settled accounts with you yet. I suspect you have been colluding with the invader for a long time. Your glass and paper business all comes from the Stone Steps Islands. All this is your doing behind the scenes. You traitor to Rhys, I will now remove you from your position as a member of parliament." After hearing Byron Haywood's words, an elderly congressman immediately stood up tremblingly and shouted angrily with a face full of anger, "Byron Haywood, although you are the governor, you have no right to dismiss any member of parliament. You can only dismiss them after a vote by the governor and the parliament. You are showing great contempt for all of us in the parliament." The situation suddenly became chaotic, and even the congressman who had previously voiced support for Governor Byron began to denounce him. Just as the situation was becoming increasingly chaotic and about to get out of control, the messenger sent by Gavin stood up slowly and leisurely, and pulled out a man who was tied up and had a bruised face from behind. The messenger looked cold and said, "Byron Haywood, this is the messenger you sent to Bravos, who went to the House of Black and White with your orders. How dare you say you don't know him? He is your confidant, and I think everyone here should know him." The moment Byron Haywood saw the man, his face turned pale as paper, as if all the blood had been drained out of him. But he was still unwilling to admit defeat, and continued to argue at the top of his lungs, "This is a conspiracy. He disappeared before, and I couldn't find any trace of him anywhere. It turns out that you kidnapped him. You tortured him into confessing and forced him to frame me." Senator Alex said sarcastically, "Byron Haywood, you are still stubborn even now." He then raised his voice and said passionately, "Members of the legislature, the evidence is now irrefutable. I propose a vote to remove Governor Byron from his post. Please raise your hands if you agree." As Alec finished speaking, the room fell into silence, as if time had frozen. Then, several members raised their hands without hesitation to show their approval. Seeing someone take the lead, members raised their right hands one after another. After a while, most people in the parliament raised their hands high, and the vote in favor showed an overwhelming trend. Chapter 114. Chaos of Rhys 2. Seeing this scene, Byron Haywood knew that the situation was hopeless and that he would lose everything. The huge wealth he had accumulated for half his life would be ruthlessly taken away, his many lovers would throw themselves into the arms of others without hesitation, and even his offspring might be killed with him. Despair and fear were like two ruthless hands, tightly strangling his throat and making him completely lose his mind. Since he was destined to lose everything, he didn't mind dragging everyone down with him. While the voting was not over yet, he immediately turned around and hurried towards the door. For a moment, no one in the Parliament Hall reacted, and no one tried to stop him. After Byron Haywood suddenly opened the door, he shouted at the top of his lungs to the unsullied guards who were waiting outside the door, "Secure everyone in here. Anyone who dares to move will be killed without mercy." The Unsullied acted upon hearing the order, drew out their gleaming weapons, rushed into the hall like a tide, and surrounded the congressman tightly. The congressmen looked at Byron Haywood in horror, their eyes full of disbelief, as if they had seen a completely unfamiliar demon. The hall suddenly fell into a deathly silence, as if even the air had frozen. Byron Haywood ignored the panicked people in the Parliament Hall and quickly called his confidants to order anxiously, "Search those councillors for the whips that control the Unsullied, and take people to raid their mansions. Anyone who resists will be killed. Post a notice in the city that I will hire all the mercenaries to join the war at double the price." His confidant listened to this crazy order in a daze, his eyes widened, and he couldn't believe his ears for a moment. It was not until he was severely whipped by Byron Haywood that he woke up from his dream and hurriedly took the order to make arrangements. At this time on the Bel Aris, Hassan was reporting the carefully counted casualties to Gavin with a serious expression. "Sir, in yesterday's battle, more than 27 soldiers of our fleet were killed and nearly 23 were injured. 5 warships were unfortunately sunk, and 2 were severely damaged. Fortunately, the warships were successfully towed to Yedge Island and should be able to be put into use after repair. In addition, we successfully sank enemy ships and captured warships, but the damage of these warships varied, and most of them were longships, so not many could be put into use immediately. In addition, we also captured more than Rhee's navy prisoners, and I have properly placed these prisoners on Yedge Island." Gavin nodded slightly after hearing this. He brought most of the forces of the Stone Steps Islands with him on this battle, a total of 60 sailing ships and more than 4,000 soldiers. Although the dragons provided great help in the naval battle, he was still quite satisfied with the loss ratio. He had always insisted on gradually replacing the fleet with sailing warships, and now it seemed to be the right decision. After successfully capturing Rhees, he must continue to vigorously promote the renewal of the fleet. Only in this way can he have absolute control of the sea. Gavin's face was calm, and he said slowly, "First, properly arrange for the wounded. We will not carry out landing operations for the time being, as the casualties would be too great. Let the fleet surround Rhees tightly, and it won't be long before the city will be short of food. We will take action after the chaos in the city. By the way, has the envoy who persuaded him to surrender returned?" Hassan responded immediately, "Not yet, sir. I'm looking for help from Alec, with whom we have done business before, but I don't think there is much hope. Byron Haywood won't surrender so easily." Gavin also smiled and said, "I didn't have much hope for surrender. After all, the conditions we offered were too harsh. As long as Byron Haywood didn't want to die, he would never surrender. My goal is to cause divisions among them. By then, Rhees will inevitably fall into civil strife, which will make them consume each other's strength. No matter who wins in the end, it will be a good thing for us, and it will be much easier for us when we attack the city." With the large-scale mobilization of troops in Rhees, people in the streets and alleys were panicked for a while, and shops closed their doors one after another, fearing that they would be caught in this sudden storm. The originally lively market became deserted, and only the footsteps of soldiers passing by occasionally broke the silence. The army supporting Byron Haywood was like an out-of-control beast, not only looting the houses of the congressmen, but also taking the opportunity to plunder the shops of the merchants in the city. They kicked open the magnificent doors, looted all the property, killed any merchants who resisted, raped women, and trampled on people's dignity. This atrocity provoked strong resistance from the wealthy merchants, who summoned their own guards to engage in a fierce confrontation with Byron Haywood's army. For a time, the entire city was ablaze with flames, shouts of killing, and the sound of weapons clashing. Blood stained the streets, raging fires devoured the houses. Women and children screamed in fear and fled in search of safe corners. Soldiers from both sides fought hand-to-hand in the narrow alleys, swords flashed, and people fell every moment. Some innocent civilians were caught up in the melee and became victims. They were either shot by stray arrows or killed by out-of-control soldiers. The once peaceful city has now turned into a hell on earth, in chaos. The turmoil in the city had lasted for 10 days. All resources had been exhausted in the battle, and food and water were in extreme shortage. Hunger and disease began to spread among the people. The wounded soldiers and innocent civilians groaned in pain, but could not get effective treatment. The hired mercenaries had already gone mad with killing and had completely lost their minds. They no longer obeyed any orders and just burned, killed, and looted in the city based on their instincts. Byron Haywood, who had been barely controlling the city defense army, saw his control over the army drop sharply. Soldiers mutinied every day, and some even turned against him and joined the camp that was resisting him. The streets were full of corpses, no one cleaned them up, and the stench was disgusting. The hungry people frantically searched for anything to fill their stomachs, and some even attacked the soldiers to steal food. Most of the wells in the city have dried up, and the few remaining water sources are heavily guarded, but conflicts over water sources still occur from time to time, and each time is accompanied by blood and death. Byron Haywood tried to reorganize the army and restore order, but his orders seemed so pale and powerless in this chaos. His confidants also began to panic, not knowing when this disaster would end. Chapter 115, Invasion of Rhees. During the 10 days when the city of Rhees was in chaos, the fleet that Gavin had sent out to block the news was also under tremendous pressure. Although the ship that brought the news from Lys was sunk, the long-term blockade of the waterway had reached its limit. Due to the news that Lys's sea trade route was cut off, Tyrosh and Mir finally realized that something was wrong, but then news came that Gawain sent envoys to Volantis. That's why they didn't dare to act rashly. They just sent a few warships to Rhees, trying to find out what happened. However, they were successfully blocked by Gavin's blockade fleet, resulting in a standoff between the two sides. Gavin felt that the time was almost right. He looked at Rhys, who was in chaos. A gleam of determination flashed in his eyes. He raised the sword high in his hand and gave the order for a general attack. The fleet began to approach the city of Lys. The crossbows on the warships fired frantically at the enemies on the city walls. Some Lys defenders who had no intention of fighting began to flee for their lives. Except for a few scattered places where there was resistance, there was not even any effective counterattack. At one time, countless small boats full of soldiers rowed towards the shore. The blazing shadow soared into the sky, carrying Gavin on its back and rushing towards the sky above the city of Rhys. Gavin rode on the back of Jiaying, looking down from a high vantage point. He saw several catapults madly throwing boulders at their own fleet. Each throw was accompanied by a deafening roar, and the sound of the boulders breaking through the air was terrifying. As if it could sense the anger burning in its master's heart, Blazing Shadow dived without hesitation. It was as fast as lightning, charging straight at the catapult with the force of a thunderbolt. With a heart-stirring roar that resounded through the sky, the blazing, surging dragon flames roared and swept over the city walls like a violent wave. The soldiers operating the catapults had no time to react before they were engulfed by the dragon flames that could turn everything into ashes. In an instant, they disappeared without a trace, leaving only a pool of ashes. Under the merciless scorching heat, the catapult quickly twisted and melted, turning into a pile of scrap metal. Jia Ying's powerful tail swung violently with the power to destroy everything, carrying an overwhelming momentum, instantly shattering the other catapult behind him, and the parts flew around like meteors, drawing dazzling arcs in the air. Under the cover of the dense attacks from the crossbows and the terrifying threat of the dragon flames, most of the soldiers were able to land smoothly and successfully. They moved quickly and began to assemble in an orderly manner. Seeing this, Gavin ordered the Blazing Shadow to fly towards the city gate without hesitation. The tightly closed tall city gate seemed extremely solid, but in front of Jiaying it was as fragile as a piece of thin paper that could be broken at the slightest touch. As the dragon flame spurted out of Jiaying's mouth, the scorching heat instantly engulfed the heavy and solid city gate. The city gate instantly turned into a blazing sea of fire. The blazing flames shot up into the sky, completely clearing the way forward for the army. The Blazing Shadow then flew towards the city, its majestic figure shuttled through the flames. Any place that had the power to fight back and could shoot crossbows would be ruthlessly destroyed by its ruthless and devastating dragon flame. The houses burned fiercely in the flames, crackling, and the thick smoke rolled like thick dark clouds, covering the sky and the sun. Miserable cries and desperate cries for help echoed one after another in this sea of fire, as if they were the painful wails of the city. At this time, Byron Haywood could no longer control the army in the chaos. In a hurry, he led hundreds of Unsullied to the city gate. His steps were hurried and heavy, and the expression on his face was tense and resolute, with a trace of tragic heroism of fighting to the death. After Gavin discovered this team, he made a prompt decision and immediately drove Jiaying to dive down rapidly. At this time, Byron Haywood, who was extremely angry and nervous, also keenly caught the figure rushing in the air. He widened his eyes, and the outlines of Gavin and Jiaying were reflected in his pupils more and more clearly. The Unsullied were well trained and they quickly drew their spears. Their muscles were tense, veins on their arms bulged, and their eyes were sharp as they stared at the rapidly approaching threat. As Blazing Shadow approached with the strong wind, the Unsullied roared in unison and threw their short spears into the air. The short spears shot at Blazing Shadow like dense raindrops, but when these short spears touched Blazing Shadow's iron-hard scales, they only made a series of crisp and rapid ding-dong sounds, as if fine iron was colliding, but they did not cause even the slightest damage to Blazing Shadow. Then, Jiaying opened his mouth and a surging, extremely hot dragon flame gushed out. The dragon flames were like a roaring fire dragon, completely devouring the team of Unsullied in an instant with overwhelming force. In this suffocating high temperature, the Unsullied didn't even have time to scream before they turned into ashes in an instant, dissipating in the scorching air, without even a trace left. Looking at the blazing sea of fire in front of him, Byron Haywood was furious like a wild beast that had lost its mind. His eyes were red, his eye sockets were about to burst, the veins on his neck were bulging, and each vein was clearly visible. He roared hysterically, "Gavin Bellaris, I will never forgive you. I curse you to die a horrible death." His voice was filled with endless despair, anger, and unwillingness, as if he wanted to tear the whole world apart. Gavin clearly heard his horse shouting, but his eyes did not show any emotion, only a cold and ruthless light flashed across them. Blazing Shadow seemed to have accurately sensed the master's firm will, and flapped its huge wings without hesitation, rushing towards Byron Haywood with the force of thunder. Another huge burst of dragon flames spurted out of its mouth, and the blazing and dazzling flames instantly enveloped Byron Haywood completely. His hateful curses came to an abrupt end, and no sound could come out of his throat anymore. Only the sizzling sound of the flames burning his flesh was left, which was horrifying. The air around him seemed to be distorted violently by the extremely horrifying high temperature. Gavin watched all this coldly, without a trace of pity in his heart. In his eyes, Byron Haywood's fate was already doomed. As Gavin's army advanced, they quickly took control of the city defences with lightning speed. Soldiers poured into the streets and alleys like a tide, launching a brutal and ruthless purge of the mercenaries in the city. The soldiers holding sharp blades had grim faces. They searched every corner and house by house for traces of mercenaries. Once they found the target, a bloody fight ensued. The flashes of swords and shadows intersected, and the shouts of killing were deafening. Although the mercenaries fought desperately, they gradually fell into a desperate situation in front of Gavin's well-trained and well-equipped army. The mercenaries occupying the tall courtyard walls were also roasted to death by Jia Ying's dragon flames. Chapter 116. Brienne's sudden arrival. The people in the city looked at the giant dragon circling in the sky and sometimes swooping down in horror. They hid in their homes, closed their doors and windows, and trembled uncontrollably. Children were hugged tightly in their mothers' arms, their clothes soaked with tears. The elderly prayed silently in the corner, praying that this disaster would end soon. The smoke of battle filled every corner of the city, blood dyed the streets red, and the footsteps and shouts of the soldiers, together with the groans of the wounded, formed a hellish scene. This fierce battle lasted until noon of the second day, when it finally came to an end. Almost all the mercenaries who participated in the riot in the city were killed. Their bodies were lying on the ground in all directions, and the blood gathered into streams, reflecting a frightening light in the sun. The houses on both sides of the street were dilapidated, and some were still emitting wisps of smoke. The once prosperous city of Riez was now dead silent, as if it had lost its soul. Gavin's army began to clean up the battlefield in an orderly manner. Carts loaded with food were slowly transported into the city, and the heavy wheels left deep marks on the cobblestone road. Soldiers conveyed Gavin's orders door to door, and his loud voice echoed in the streets and alleys, "As long as you are responsible for cleaning up the corpses and ruins, you can get food." Under the extremely tempting attraction of the food, the civilians of Riez, who had previously kept their doors closed and were full of fear, finally mustered up their courage and began to cautiously walk onto the streets to help clean up the bodies, trembling with fear but full of expectation. Soldiers set up checkpoints at various intersections to maintain order. They stood as straight as pine trees, with sharp and vigilant eyes, ensuring that the entire situation was firmly under control. In the governor's square, which was once magnificent but had long since been reduced to ashes in the turmoil, countless gold, silver, and treasures were piled up into an eye-catching hill, sparkling with dazzling light under the bright sunshine. After a thrilling turmoil, the governors and wealthy merchants of the entire Riez were destroyed like falling stars, and disappeared in the torrent of history. The greedy mercenaries who tried to seize their wealth were also eliminated by Gavin. The ill-gotten gains that were once stained with blood and sin finally gathered here and piled up like a mountain. People passing by looked at the mountains of treasures, with both amazement at the wealth and size for the previous turmoil in their eyes. Gavin stood on a high place, overlooking it all, thinking in his mind how to rebuild this devastated city and bring it back to life. Next, he would have to take control of the many towns and villages controlled by Lys, as well as face the reactions of Tyrosh and Mir. I'm afraid he will have to stay in Lys for a short period of time. Stone Steps Archipelago, Bloodstone Island. In the magnificent city lord's palace, the monthly civilian petition was taking place. Daenerys sat upright on the high seat, her posture straight, her eyes majestic and solemn. Vice Ryan lay quietly at her feet, occasionally flapping his wings lazily. Maester Qyburn and Governor Boris sat beside him, taking notes and giving Daenerys some advice from time to time. An old man in ragged clothes stepped forward first. He bowed deeply and said in a trembling voice, "Dear lady, my fishing boat was completely destroyed in a storm during a voyage. Now I have lost my livelihood and my family is starving. I beg you to lend me a fishing boat so that I can go out to sea to fish again and support my family." Daenerys nodded slightly and said, "Old man, I deeply sympathize with your situation. I will order someone to build you a new fishing boat as soon as possible so that you can support your family again. You can repay the territory for the new fishing boat in 5 years." Then, a haggard woman cried with tears streaming down her face, "Lady, my husband was injured while working for the Lord. Now he is bedridden and unable to work. I am unable to afford the expenses of the family and the tuition of my children. I beg you to give us some relief to help us through this difficult time." Daenerys looked at him with pity, and responded, "Poor woman, I will arrange for a doctor to treat your husband, and I will also send some supplies and money to help you through this difficult time." Then, a young blacksmith came forward in a hurry. He looked anxious and said, "Madam, there have been frequent thieves in my West City district recently. They stole the farm tools that I worked hard to make in my shop and injured my buddies. I implore you to strengthen public security, catch these thieves, and take back my property." Daenerys looked serious and said decisively, "Don't worry, I will send more soldiers to strengthen patrols and make sure to catch these thieves and bring them to justice, so that you and everyone can live a peaceful and harmonious life." Just as the petition was about to end, a tall figure wearing a hood slowly stepped forward. He gently lifted the hood and it was Brienne of Tarth whom Daenerys had seen before. Seeing the newcomer, Daenerys was surprised and said, "Miss Brienne, we meet again. I wonder why you came to the Stepstones this time." Brienne bowed respectfully and said sincerely, "Your Highness, I am here to ask for your forgiveness. I was deceived and misunderstood you before. Now that I think about it, I feel extremely ashamed and regretful for my ignorance and prejudice." Daenerys smiled, her smile full of tolerance and generosity, and said slowly, "It's all right, Lady Brienne. I'm sure the news from Braavos has also reached you. You are also unaware of some things and have been deceived by the lies of the usurper. Since you have come to the Stepstones, I will naturally do my best to be a good host. You can stay here as a guest for the time being." Brienne's eyes flashed with gratitude, and she quickly said, "Thank you for your warm reception, Your Highness. I'm sorry to bother you during this time." Daenerys ordered the waiter to carefully arrange a comfortable place for Brienne. Maester Qyburn, who was standing by, looked at Brienne's back with a worried look on his face, and said to Daenerys, "My lady, you must be careful. The Tarth family has always been loyal to the usurper. I am worried that she may be disguised as a visitor this time, but in fact she is an assassin who came to kill you." Daenerys' eyes were firm, like bright stars, and she said, "I have had contact with her before. I believe she is not an assassin sent by the usurper. Her character is far superior to that hypocritical usurper." Maester Qyburn frowned and said, "That being said, Lord Gavin repeatedly told us to ensure your safety before he left. Please allow me to send someone to keep an eye on Brienne, and please do not leave the protection of the Blood Dragon Guard when you travel." Daenerys frowned slightly, thinking for a moment, and then said, "Okay, then I will act according to your arrangements. I will be careful and pay attention. Thank you for your concern, Maester Qyburn." Chapter 117. Assassination and Female Knight. At this time, Boris said, "Madam, some officials from various islands have also come to Bloodstone Island today. They need to report some important government affairs to you. If you allow me, I will arrange for them to meet with you this afternoon." Daenerys looked calm and said calmly, "Okay, then please arrange it." Boris paused after hearing this, and then continued, "Madam, a new glass workshop will be put into use on Grey Gallows Island in 2 days. I need to go there to take a look. The time is not long. I'll leave the affairs of the Stone Steps Islands to you while I'm away." Daenerys was delighted after hearing this, thinking that this was a manifestation of Boris's recognition of her. Now he was confident in handing over the management of the Stepstones to her. However, she thought of Grey Gallows Island, which she had never been to, and said, "Why don't I go there? Gavin is not here, and Bloodstone Island cannot do without you, Governor Boris. Besides, I have never been to Grey Gallows Island, so I can take this opportunity to visit it." Hearing Daenerys' suggestion, Boris hesitated for a moment, and finally agreed, "Okay, madam, please bring all the guards and warships to escort us to ensure safety." Daenerys smiled confidently and nodded solemnly, "Don't worry, Governor Boris. With the Blood Dragon Guards that Gavin sent to me, nothing will happen." After hearing this, Boris stood up, bowed and said, "Then I will go and arrange the ship and travel for you. Madam, please allow me to take my leave first." At Daenerys' nod, Boris left the hall. When Gavin left the Stepstones, he handed over control of the territory to his fiancée Daenerys in accordance with tradition. His original intention was to take this opportunity to train Daenerys' governing ability to prevent her from making numerous mistakes as in the original plot, which would eventually lead to rebellion among her subordinates. At first, Daenerys was at a loss for what to do in the face of this sudden responsibility. She was often in a rush when handling government affairs, and even made a lot of jokes due to her lack of experience. At that time, she was full of anxiety and self-doubt, and every decision she made was made with trepidation and caution. However, with the unremitting assistance of Qyburn, Boris, and many other officials, Daenerys gradually got the hang of governing in just half a month. She began to learn how to weigh the pros and cons in complex situations and how to make wise decisions that would benefit the development of the territory. As time went by, she became more and more adept at handling government affairs and was no longer as confused and helpless as she was at the beginning. In this process, Daenerys gradually discovered her potential in ruling and management. She grew from a timid little girl who always relied on others' opinions to a resolute and independent leader. She began to dare to face problems alone, and only selectively adopted the advice of others, instead of blindly following them. Instead, she made decisions after careful consideration. 2 days later, the sun sprinkled on the sparkling sea like broken gold, and a gentle breeze blew slowly, bringing a hint of salty scent. Not only is Brienne the first guest invited by Daenerys, but she is also a noble from Westeros. Daenerys is worried that Brienne will be disrespectful to the other party during this trip, so she decides to invite Brienne to Grey Gallows Island in the name of a visit. The warship sailed on the sea, braving the wind and waves. The surroundings were boundless clear blue, and occasionally white seagulls flew by with joyful cries. Grey Gallows Island gradually became clear in the field of vision. The island was lush and green, with rolling green hills and lush green trees like giant umbrellas, covering the sky. The mountains in the distance were like winding dragons, blending with the blue sky like gems, and the leisurely white clouds floated in between like a veil, like a beautiful natural painting. The warship slowly docked, and Daenerys and Brienne got off the ship. The governor of Grey Gallows Island, Harvey Strong, had been waiting here respectfully. He leaned forward slightly, saluted Daenerys in a standard and respectful manner, and said humbly, "Madam, I am Harvey Strong, the governor of Grey Gallows Island appointed by Lord Gawain. I respectfully welcome you. The carriage and accommodation have been carefully prepared for you." Daenerys nodded slightly, with a faint smile on her lips, and said, "Thank you for your hard work, Governor Harvey." Harvey then asked, "Madam, do you plan to go directly to the newly built glass workshop, or take a walk around the town first to appreciate the local customs?" After hearing this, Daenerys thought for a moment and said, "Let's go check the workshop first. After all, business is more important." After that, Daenerys and Brienne boarded the carriage together, followed by 10 majestic blood dragon guards. The carriage moved slowly on the slightly rugged road, and the wheels rolled over the stones and soil, making a creaking sound. Daenerys looked out the window, curiously observing the scenery along the way. There were lush trees on both sides of the road, and scattered farmlands and farmhouses in the distance. She was full of anticipation for the glass workshop she was about to arrive at. She had heard that paper could be burned there to make exquisite glass, and she imagined what the scene would be like there. After a while, the carriage stopped steadily in front of a large building. The workshop manager and many workers were already waiting outside the door. The exterior of this glass workshop is made of solid bricks and stones, and part of the walls are covered with lush green vines, as if giving the workshop a natural coat. The tall and heavy door exudes a solid and mysterious atmosphere, making people curious about the world inside. Under Harvey's guidance, Daenerys and Brienne walked into the workshop. The interior of the workshop was spacious and bright, with sunlight shining through the skylight onto the various glass products on display, reflecting colorful light. There are crystal-clear vases with smooth lines and exquisite craftsmanship. There are unique and ingenious ornaments that look like lively animals or wonderful mythical creatures. There are also glittering and dazzling wine glasses, as if waiting to hold precious wines. Harvey introduced them enthusiastically and in detail. "Madam, these are the most outstanding works of our workshop. Each one of them is the result of the hard work and wisdom of the craftsman." Brienne picked up an exquisite glass ornament and examined it carefully. She couldn't help but sigh, "I've heard that the glass products produced in the stepstones are very exquisite and famous. This is the first time I've seen a real one. It's really as beautiful as its reputation says." They visited with great interest. Daenerys kept asking various questions about glass production, such as the production process and the source of raw materials. She also asked about the workers' working and living conditions with concern. She watched for a long time without realizing it. When they finished their visit and walked out of the workshop, suddenly, a large wooden house in the distance began to billow with smoke without warning. In just a short moment, the fire spread rapidly like a wild horse running wild, and the roof was instantly engulfed by the raging flames. The flames shot up into the sky, as if they were going to burn the sky red. Harvey was extremely anxious when he saw this. He shouted at the top of his voice for someone to put out the fire. Quick! Come and put out the fire. Daenerys looked anxious and asked loudly, what is in this house? While directing everyone, Harvey hurriedly replied, Madam, this is a fuel warehouse. There is a lot of coal in the warehouse, which is the fuel for making glass. Fortunately, there are not many people in the warehouse, only an old man who is in charge of guarding it. Seeing this, Daenerys immediately ordered the blood dragon guards beside her to join the fire fighting without hesitation. Quick, go and help put out the fire. As the flames raged wildly, the entire workshop was instantly thrown into chaos. The workers panicked and hurriedly ran back and forth in the flames and smoke, carrying buckets of water. Shouts and the sound of splashing water were heard one after another, interweaving into a noisy and chaotic scene. The blood dragon guards were agile and quickly engaged in the firefighting operation. They carried buckets of water and walked quickly, constantly pouring water towards the workshop. The water splashed in the firelight, but it seemed like just a drop in the bucket. Daenerys was anxiously directing the group, with beads of sweat on her forehead and a slightly hoarse voice due to nervousness. Brienne also stepped forward to help organize the panicked crowd and make everyone's actions more orderly. With everyone's concerted efforts, the fire was finally brought under control and no longer spread so wildly. Just as Daenerys breathed a sigh of relief, a man carrying a bucket slowly approached her as if nothing had happened. While everyone was concentrating on putting out the fire, a fierce look suddenly flashed in his eyes. He suddenly pulled out a sharp dagger from the bucket and stabbed it rapidly towards Daenerys' back. Before the assassin could succeed, Brienne reacted quickly and kicked the assassin hard in the chest. The assassin was caught off guard, and flew backwards like a kite with its string cut off, falling heavily to the ground. Daenerys was shocked to realize that it was the assassin who was approaching her, and she was so frightened that she quickly took 2 steps back. Seeing that his attack failed, the assassin's eyes instantly turned bloodshot, revealing a resolute and ruthless expression, like a mad beast. He roared, holding a dagger, and rushed towards Daenerys again without hesitation. Brienne did not hesitate and drew her sword to meet the enemy. Brienne was agile and dodged the assassin's fierce thrust. At the same time, she swung the sword in her hand, forcing the assassin to retreat again and again. Not to be outdone, the assassin brandished his dagger, trying to break through Brienne's defense, but Brienne's defense was impenetrable. Just as the assassin attacked again and stabbed Brienne with the dagger, Brienne saw the right moment, turned around skillfully, and slashed down with the sword in her hand with the force of thunder. With a crack, accompanied by the assassin's scream, his arm holding the dagger was cut off by the sword, and blood splattered. The assassin fell to the ground in pain, and the dagger in his hand fell. At this time, the blood dragon guards rushed over quickly, pressed the assassin to the ground and controlled him firmly. Daenerys calmed down and said with lingering fear, "Thanks to you, Brienne. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid I would be in great danger." Brienne sheathed her sword, bowed slightly and said, "You are welcome, Your Highness. This is what I should do." Daenerys calmed down and said with emotion, "It was really dangerous today, but fortunately it was just a false alarm." Harvey, who rushed over, also breathed a sigh of relief. His whole body was covered in cold sweat, and he was still frightened. If something happened to Lady Daenerys here, he would probably have to die to apologize. He rushed forward in anger, stepped on the assassin's wound, and asked sternly, "You, who sent you?" The assassin's face turned pale instantly, beads of sweat the size of beans rolled down his face like rain, and his whole body was shaking with extreme pain. He gasped for air, his eyes filled with fear and despair, and he said in a hoarse voice, "It was Peter, the Minister of Finance. Peter, he said it was the king's order. I have failed in my mission and have no way to survive. Please give me a quick death and stop torturing me." Daenerys frowned slightly, her beautiful eyes full of solemnity and thought, and said in a deep voice, "Take him away first and interrogate him strictly. We must find out how he got in carefully. No clues can be missed." Her sharp eyes swept over everyone, as if she could see through everything. "This matter is of great importance. You must give me a result as soon as possible." Everyone answered yes and dragged the assassin away. After this incident, Daenerys and her party had no intention of continuing the inspection and quickly returned to their residence. On the way back in the carriage, Daenerys's gratitude to Brienne became even deeper. At night, Daenerys invited Brienne to dinner. The soft candle light flickered on their faces, creating a warm and intimate atmosphere. The two chatted for a long time at the dining table, sharing each other's experiences. Daenerys gently put down the cutlery in her hand, looked at Brienne with gratitude, and said sincerely, "Brienne, if it weren't for you today, I'm afraid I would have been killed. I have no way to repay you for saving my life." Brienne said quickly, "Your Highness, you don't have to do this. I don't think anyone would sit idly by if they encountered this situation." His eyes unconsciously fell on the shining sword at Brienne's waist, and he asked curiously, "Brittany, I've always wanted to know why you always carry this sword with you." Brienne looked a little lonely, with a hint of bitterness in her eyes. "Your Highness, I am not a noble lady. I have been fond of swordsmanship and the spirit of chivalry since I was a child, and this passion has accompanied me as I grew up. But all this was not understood, but instead I was ridiculed a lot. Everyone always thinks that I am not gentle enough, too rude, and that a woman should not hold a sword." Daenerys shook her head, with admiration in her eyes. "Brienne, your courage is worthy of praise. Ignore the opinions of those short-sighted people. Women can also wield swords on the battlefield and defend their beliefs and dignity." Brienne's eyes flashed with gratitude. "I am honored to hear your Highness say this." Daenerys smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Brittany, how long have you been practicing with your sword?" Brienne fell into reminiscence, the corners of her mouth slightly raised. "When I was a child, I always sneaked to the training ground to watch the knights wielding swords, and my heart was full of yearning. But when I plucked up the courage to try to pick up the sword, the people around me stared at me with strange eyes, pointed fingers, and even laughed at me, saying that I shouldn't do this at all. Fortunately, my father has always supported me. Not only did he not stop me, but he personally taught me swordsmanship. It was his encouragement that made me more determined to walk on this path." Daenerys sighed softly after hearing this, as if she was saddened by the injustice of the world. "Lord Tarth is a good father. There is too much prejudice against women in this world. When I was a child, I lived in Bravos with Viserys. At that time, the usurper often sent assassins to attack us, and we had to hide everywhere. I often thought, how great it would be if I could take up a weapon to protect myself like you." Brienne felt the resonance in Daenerys' words, and her expression became more determined. "Your Highness, although I have not had similar experiences as you, I understand that no matter what situation I am in, only I can win respect and protection for myself." Daenerys' eyes sparkled with admiration, and she said slowly, "Brittany, your firm belief and courage are no less than any knight. I think you can become a knight. Your swordsmanship and determination are both necessary to become a true knight." Brienne opened her eyes wide in surprise, as if she couldn't believe what she heard. Then she said sadly, "Your Highness, there has never been a woman knighted in Westeros, and even if there was, it would not be recognized by the world." Daenerys shook her head and said with determination in her eyes, "I don't care about those worldly views. Brienne, we are both women. In my opinion, your bravery far surpasses many so-called knights. If you are willing, I will knight you as a symbol of my recognition of your determination and courage. From now on, you will be a knight beside me, fighting for me." Brienne was so excited that she could hardly speak. Her eyes were slightly red. She choked up and said, "Your Highness, thank you for giving me this honor. I will live up to your expectations and do my best to protect you." After hearing Brienne's words, Daenerys immediately stood up, took the Dark Sister from the shelf beside her, and pulled out the sword. The slender sword has a unique and mysterious Valyrian steel pattern, like a winding stream flowing on the sword. The blade flashes with a cold light, as if it can cut through the void. Daenerys raised the sword solemnly with both hands, and said solemnly, "This sword is the family sword of the Targaryen family, the Dark Sister. It has witnessed countless glory and legends. I believe that only it can be worthy of your canonization today. Please kneel, Brienne of Tarth." Brienne walked to Daenerys with excitement and hurried steps, then slowly knelt on one knee. Her eyes were firm and ardent, full of anticipation for the upcoming glory. Daenerys raised her sword with a bit of solemnity and placed it firmly on Brienne's shoulder. Her voice was clear and powerful, echoing in the air, "I, Daenerys Targaryen Stormborn, Queen of the Andals, the Rhoynar and the First Men, and the only rightful heir to the Iron Throne, do hereby appoint Brienne of Tarth as a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. In the name of courage, I ask you to be fearless. When facing a strong enemy, go forward bravely and never retreat. In the name of wisdom, I ask you to be wise, to see the truth and make the right choice in difficult situations. In the name of mercy, I ask you to be compassionate. Treat the weak with compassion, and give them protection and care. At this time, Brienne also raised her head and looked at Daenerys solemnly, her eyes full of determination and loyalty, and she said solemnly, I, Brienne of Tarth, swear on my life to dedicate my loyalty to Daenerys Targaryen without reservation. From now on, my sword will only fight for you, for your honor, for your justice. I will go through fire and water, even if I lose my life. Then Daenerys put down the sword, the corners of her mouth slightly raised, her eyes full of trust and expectation. Get up, Brienne of Tarth, my sworn knight. May your name shine in the future history of the Seven Kingdoms. Daenerys stroked the Dark Sister and said, this Valyrian steel sword has never shined as it should in my hands. I know that I am not good at using a sword, and the Targaryen family sword has been somewhat buried in my hands. Now I give it to you to use. Brienne looked at Daenerys in shock, unable to believe this expensive gift. Daenerys smiled and handed the sword over again, saying, take it, Brienne. I believe that in your hands, it can defend more justice. Brienne solemnly took the Valyrian steel sword, her hands trembling slightly, her heart moved, and said, Your Highness, I will not let you down. This sword will accompany me to protect your dignity and honor. If I violate it, may the seven gods punish me. Daenerys nodded and said, I believe you, Brienne. Brienne held the Dark Sister tightly in her hands, as if she was holding a heavy and sacred mission. Chapter 118. Recruiting mercenaries and expanding. In the city of Rhys inside the governor's palace, Gavin sat quietly behind the quaint desk, looking calmly at the big bear standing in front of him, Yoram Mormont. At this time, Yoram Mormont was probably less than 40 years old, a northern man in his prime. His dark skin seemed to have gone through countless hardships, and his thick hair grew in a messy manner. Although his head was slightly bald, his sturdy body still exuded a strong sense of power. He looked quite disheveled now, his face was blackened and grayed by smoke, his already worn-out clothes were torn in many places and looked tattered. The long sword he carried with him was nowhere to be found, leaving only an empty scabbard hanging around his waist. Not long ago, after Gawain completely captured the city of Lys, Hassan accidentally heard the name Yoram Mormont while inspecting the mercenary captives. Thinking that he had previously arranged ships to send prisoners in the territory to the Wall under the orders of Lord Gawain, and that the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch there was also named Mormont, and that there were rumors that his son Yoram Mormont had come to the East Continent to serve as a mercenary in order to escape trial, Hassan did not dare to delay and hurriedly reported the matter to Gawain, thus leading to this unusual meeting. Gavin slowly showed a gentle smile on his face, and slowly said, Nice to meet you, Sir Yora. I didn't expect that our first meeting would be under such circumstances. Yora looked at Gavin with doubts, and then said, I am just a mercenary captive now, not a knight anymore. My lord, who are you? Why do you know me? Gavin nodded slightly and said solemnly, Let me introduce myself. I am Gavin Belleris. I believe you have heard of my name recently. Yora smiled a helpless and bitter smile upon hearing this. He was also captive because of him. He responded, Of course. Your reputation is well known in Lys recently. I'm sure it's spreading to places farther away in Essos. Gawain stood up, poured Yora a glass of mellow red wine, and motioned him to sit down. Not long ago, I went to the Wall as a guest. Your father, Commander Mormont, received me. When I was in the north, I also heard about your past. I didn't expect you to be stranded in Lys now. Hearing Gavin talking about his father, Yoram Mormont's face instantly showed a deep sadness, and he asked in a low voice, Is my father okay? He's doing fine. At least when I saw him, he was in good health. He is currently devoting himself to the affairs of the Night's Watch. After hearing this, Yora looked slightly relieved. He had not heard any news about his father for a long time since leaving the north, but he never expected to have such an unexpected gain here. Thinking of his current difficult situation, Yora felt uneasy and asked cautiously, I wonder how Lord Gavin plans to deal with me. Gavin smiled and said calmly, I have already inquired about the relevant situation. You were just passively involved in the turmoil of those mercenaries. You can leave at any time later. After hearing this, Xiao La bowed with gratitude and said, Thank you for your kindness. Gavin waved his hand and then asked with a smile, Since you make a living as a mercenary now, I wonder if you can accept my employment? I hope you can train and command the mercenaries I captured before. I believe you know them better than I do. Gavin captured thousands of mercenaries this time. He had intended to recruit them, but most of his subordinates were captains and the naval soldiers he had commanded before were all specially customized Unsullied. Gaben had intended to command these mercenaries himself, but since he happened to find Yora stranded here, he decided to hand over the captives to him. Yora's military ability is not weak, and he has participated in wars. He has nowhere to go, so taming him now is like a timely help. We don't expect him to train the prisoners to be elite, but it would be good for him to serve as cannon fodder in subsequent wars. Yoram Mormont hesitated for only a moment before decisively deciding to accept the offer. He then said firmly, "Thank you for your appreciation of me. I am willing to accept your offer. Please rest assured that I will not let you down." Gavin nodded and said, "That's settled. Go find Hassan and he will arrange it for you." "As you command, my lord." Yoram Mormont stepped back respectfully. Gavin slowly walked to the window and looked solemnly at the still devastated city of Lys. Although the once blazing flames had been extinguished, the broken walls and ruins after the burning were still shocking. In this terrible turmoil, the number of buildings that were set on fire far exceeded the damage caused by his dragon-riding attack. At this time, after a simple cleanup of the city of Rize, the piles of corpses in the city had been pulled out one after another. The city had barely restored basic order, and the civilians and prisoners were organized in an orderly manner, and were busy cleaning up the ruins of the buildings. According to Hassan's estimation, the cleanup work would be completed in about 3 days. Gavin was thinking in his mind that he was going to start taking over the towns and villages previously controlled by Rize in the next 2 days, which had weak defenses but were numerous. Most of these towns are located in the southwestern corner of Essos, occupying a part of the disputed land, bordering Tyrosh, Mir, and Volantis, and separated from the Isle of Lys by only a short strait. But at this moment, Gavin was faced with a serious shortage of troops. Excluding the personnel necessary to operate the warships, the remaining soldiers that could be mobilized were less than 2,000, and they were all infantry. And in order to ensure that there is no chaos in the city of Rize, 1,000 people must be left here to garrison. Gavin was not worried about relying on warships for naval battles, but once he landed, his army's combat power would plummet. In desperation, he could only use the captured mercenaries to make up for the lack of troops. "It's still too short." Gavin couldn't help but mutter to himself. If he could be given 3 months to digest the gains from taking over Rize city, he would be much more relaxed. However, Tyrosh and Mir were watching closely from outside, and it was unknown whether they would join the battle. Volantis might also seize the disputed land, and it was also unknown whether the Iron Throne, which was further away, would take the opportunity to make a move. Gavin knew he had to race against time and quickly take over those vital lands before they could react. 2 days later, a small storm arose at sea. Under the gloomy sky, the wind rolled up the dark clouds and roared. The waves rolled like a group of galloping wild horses, chasing and colliding with each other. The sea was turbulent, the waves splashed, and a misty water fog formed. Gavin led an army of 3,000 people, mostly captives, boarded the warship with great momentum, and headed towards the continent of Essos. The warships moved forward on the turbulent and raging strait, splitting the layers of white waves, and the hulls shook violently, as if they were fighting a fierce battle with the sea. Soon, the warships carrying soldiers passed through the short strait and approached the continent of Essos. However, the landing process was not smooth. The previous dock had been demolished due to the war, and only small boats could be used to transport soldiers. The ruthless waves continued to fiercely hit the side of the ship, making a deafening roar. The soldiers struggled to climb down the ropes and board the swaying boat amidst the violent shaking. Yora led the way and personally stood at the bow to command the mercenaries. He shouted at the top of his lungs, doing his best to maintain order and ensure that the personnel and supplies could land safely. Finally, after half a day, they successfully landed. After landing, the army took a short rest and then headed non-stop towards the nearest town, Dock. In the evening, the afterglow of the setting sun sprinkled on the earth, and finally the low walls of Dock Town were seen. Although Dock Town was small in size, its fortifications were quite strong. This town firmly controlled several nearby villages and the vital trade route connecting the sea and land, and its strategic position should not be underestimated. When the guards in the town saw the huge dragon hovering in the air and the huge army gradually approaching, they instantly fell into extreme panic. Their faces turned pale, their hands and feet trembled, and they hurriedly stumbled to report. The mayor and many slave owners who learned of this emergency situation were immediately panicked and quickly gathered together to discuss countermeasures. The destruction of the city of Lys was like a heavy wake-up call. They were well aware of the dragon's unrivaled power and knew that resistance meant destruction. For a moment, everyone looked at each other in confusion, filled with worry. The mayor looked around at everyone and said in a deep voice, "You all know the current situation. The Dragon King's army is almost outside the city. Do you have any suggestions?" As he finished speaking, the room fell into a brief silence. Someone suggested escaping with their wealth in a trembling voice. "Let's pack up our things quickly. Maybe we can find a way out before they surround us." Another slave owner retorted, "Escape? Where can we escape to? Don't you see there is a dragon in the sky? How far can we escape?" Everyone was arguing, but no one dared to resist. At this time, the mayor spoke again, his voice trembling and helpless, "Escape? We can't get far. The Dragon King's target is obviously not just our small dock town. Open the city and surrender, maybe you can save your life." After he finished speaking, the rest of the people stopped talking and the room fell into silence for a while. The mayor looked around at everyone. The slave owners all lowered their heads and did not dare to look him in the eye. The mayor sighed and said, "Since no one objects, let's do it." Then he hurriedly stood up and led everyone to the city wall. When Gavin finally approached the town, he found that the town gate was not closed. There were only a dozen people in gorgeous robes waiting quietly outside the city, and there were no defenders on the city wall. Gavin, who understood what was going on, rode his horse forward towards those people, and the blood dragon guards behind him quickly followed. Before he could get close, the dozen or so people knelt down together. The leader said with a trembling voice and deep fear, "Your Excellency Dragon King, welcome to Dock Town. I submit to you on behalf of Dock Town. We have no intention of resisting. We only ask that you treat the people in the town with kindness." Gavin looked down at the people kneeling on the ground in front of him and said with dignity, "As long as you sincerely surrender, I will ensure the safety of everyone in the town, and I will also make Dock Town prosperous under my rule." Hearing Gavin's reply, the mayor hurriedly thanked him, "Thank you for your kindness, we will be loyal to you." Then, Gavin waved his hand, and Yoram Mormont led 500 men into Dock Town quickly. In this way, the first town fell into Gavin's hands easily. Unlike the prosperous city of Rees, the towns and villages under Rees' rule had many slaves, who were responsible for labor and production to supply the nobles in the free trade city-state. As Gavin rode into the town of Dock, he saw many slaves kneeling densely on both sides of the street. They were hunched over, with their heads buried deep in the ground, not daring to look directly at the new ruler. The slaves were half naked, with old and new scars all over their bodies, which were the marks left by long-term abuse and labor. Their eyes were full of fear and helplessness, as if they were waiting for the judgment of an unknown fate. Gavin glanced at the slaves, and a complex emotion surged in his heart. Then he calmed down and stopped paying attention to the slaves. He knew very well that he could not make rash reforms when he first came to power here, otherwise unrest would easily break out. However, once he had gradually established himself, he would no longer have the will of these slave owners. His army marched neatly in the middle of the street, the sound of horse hooves and armor clashing echoed in the silent town. The slaves along the way trembled and dared not make a sound. Gavin rode on and came to the central square of the town. Some small slave owners and civilians gathered in the square, looking at Gavin tremblingly, trying to figure out the mind of the new ruler. Gavin glanced at them coldly and said, "From today on, everything here belongs to me. All of you must follow my orders. If you disobey, you will be executed immediately." The slave owners nodded in agreement. Gavin then ordered the army to temporarily station outside the city, and he took Yora and several officers together to discuss arrangements for tomorrow's march. In the next few days, Gavin captured 5 towns and countless villages in succession, basically taking control of all the land previously controlled by Rees, and also taking control of the garrisons of the previous towns. His army reached 5,000 people in one fell swoop, and every town basically surrendered without encountering any resistance. At this time, Gavin had led his army to the outside of the last town. As expected, the slave owners and officials in the town had already been waiting outside the city. Gavin rode on a tall warhorse, looking sternly at the respectful crowd in front of him. He knew in his heart that these people surrendered more out of fear of his powerful military force than true submission. But at the moment, the key is to quickly take control of the situation. Without too much nonsense, Gavin's army quickly took control of the city defense. Chapter 119. The Threat from the Thousand-Faced God. After Gavin entered the official residence in the city, many slave owners and officials who had been waiting there came to pay homage to their new ruler. A well-dressed slave owner came up first, knelt on the ground and said, "Welcome, Honorable Gavin Dragon King. I have prepared a gift for you. I'm sure you will like it. Gavin looked at the slave owner in front of him sternly, nodded and asked, what kind of gift is it? Please wait a moment, Dragon King Gavin. After saying that, the slave owner waved to the slave beside him. Then a girl holding a small box walked out of the crowd and slowly approached Gavin. The girl was about 15 or 16 years old. She was wearing a light blue dress with exquisite patterns embroidered on the hem and a white ribbon tied around her waist, which made her figure look graceful. The black box held in the girl's hands was inlaid with sparkling gems and carved with delicate patterns all around, exuding a luxurious and mysterious atmosphere. The girl walked up to Gavin, knelt on her knees, and raised the box high above her head. Gavin frowned, and the doubt on his face was gradually replaced by solemnity. He stared at the box held high by the girl. He could clearly feel a fluctuation of magical power in the box, as if an invisible hand was trying to drag him into an unknown abyss. Gavin took a deep breath and slowly reached out to open the box. The moment the lid of the box was opened, a black shadow suddenly rushed out like a ghost, instantly blinding Gavin's eyes. The black shadow formed by this magic power was not strong, and even if Gavin did not use magic power to dissipate it, it would quickly dissipate in the air. However, this black shadow successfully made him lose his vision for a moment. In the blink of an eye, the girl's eyes flashed with ruthlessness, and she quickly pulled out a sharp dagger from under the box, and took advantage of Gavin's blocked vision to stab him fiercely with lightning speed. The dagger accurately pierced Gavin's abdomen, and blood instantly dyed his clothes red. Gavin felt the pain and roared angrily. He reacted quickly and instinctively, exerting force in his leg muscles and kicking the girl hard. The girl's body hit the wall heavily like a kite with a broken string, and then fell to the ground in a mess, blood flowing from the corner of her mouth, but her eyes were still full of ferocity and unwillingness. At the same time, the blood dragon guards behind Gavin suddenly erupted. They rushed out with overwhelming force. The powerful force instantly knocked the slave owner to the ground and controlled him, making him unable to move at all. The rest of the blood dragon guards quickly separated Gavin from the others. The soldiers outside the door heard the fierce commotion coming from inside the house and rushed in like a tide. They quickly surrounded the panicked slave owners and officials, with their swords drawn and flashing coldly. Gavin covered his injured abdomen. The pain from the wound made his face even gloomier. Gavin glared at the slave owner and the girl, his eyes seemed to be able to spit fire. The slave owner stared at Gavin viciously, and quickly bit through the poison in his mouth. Blood began to flow from the corners of his mouth, and it was obvious that he was dying. Then he said, Gavin Bellaris, have you forgotten that you owe the thousand-faced god a life? When Gavin heard this, his face became even gloomier. With a thought, the blood dragon guard exploded instantly, and the powerful force instantly broke the necks of the slave owner and the girl. The two died on the spot. Then the blood dragon guard grabbed the two men's faces hard, and a mask was pulled off, revealing two unfamiliar faces. At this time, Gavin's chest was heaving violently, the pain from the wound and the anger in his heart intertwined. He looked around, ignoring the panicked slave owners and officials, and shouted to the soldiers who came in, take them all away, and then search this place thoroughly, don't miss a single corner. The soldiers responded in unison and took action quickly. With the careful support of the blood dragon guards, Gavin sat down on the chair tremblingly. This movement accidentally involved the hideous wound on his abdomen. In an instant, a sharp pain like a needle piercing him came like a tide. Gavin frowned, beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. He immediately took out a bottle of potion from his arms and quickly poured it into his mouth. As the potion took effect, the wound began to heal at an astonishing speed visible to the naked eye. But even so, he could still clearly feel a corrosive energy magic raging in his abdomen, and he had to continue to mobilize his own magic to fight against it. Obviously, the poison on the dagger that stabbed him just now was not ordinary. At this moment, the door was pushed open, and Yoram Mormont, who had rushed in after hearing the news, rushed in. He saw Gavin sitting on the chair with a pale face, and asked anxiously, "My lord, are you okay?" Gavin endured the pain, waved his hand, and said calmly, "It's a minor injury, nothing serious." He didn't want Yoram Mormont to know the real seriousness of the situation. Gavin paused for a moment, then asked, "You have travelled in Essos for a long time. Do you know where else the thousand-faced god exists besides the temple dedicated to him in Bravus?" Yoram Mormont fell into a brief contemplation after hearing this, and then said, "In addition to the House of Black and White in Bravus, I have heard that there are temples dedicated to the thousand-faced god in Volantis and Mir. However, I have been to Mir, but I have never seen a temple of the thousand-faced god there. Gavin nodded slightly after hearing this, and then ordered, Yora, go find someone to check, and ask those mercenaries. I want to know the locations of all the temples dedicated to the thousand-faced god in Essos. Although Yoram Mormont was doubtful, he still bowed respectfully and left. As he left, the room fell into deathly silence again, with only Gavin's heavy breathing echoing in the air. Gavin leaned weakly on the chair, his thoughts flying. This assassination was also an opportunity. Unlike the city of Rize, where a riot almost wiped out the upper class of Rize, the slave owners and officials of these towns surrendered faster than expected, and all the towns were still under their control. This made him always feel that there was a lack of an opportunity to clean up, and it was difficult to deal with the surrendered slave owners. And now, this assassination can be used as an opportunity to clean up a group of slave owners in a drastic manner. Doing so would not only demonstrate his majesty, but also pave the way for subsequent rule, making his control over power more secure and his rule smoother and unimpeded. On a gloomy day, the atmosphere in the town was so oppressive that it made people breathless. A group of aggressive soldiers rushed towards a magnificent slave owner's mansion like a gust of wind. Bang! The gate of the courtyard was violently pushed open by the soldiers. The slave owner was sitting leisurely in the hall and was frightened by the sudden noise. What are you doing? The slave owner widened his eyes and roared in horror. Someone reported that you were involved in the assassination of Lord Gavin. The soldier leader shouted sternly. It's unfair. How could I possibly get involved in such a thing? The slave owner quickly stood up to explain, his fat body trembling with nervousness. Stop talking nonsense. Catch him. The soldier leader gave an order, and several soldiers quickly stepped forward and twisted the slave owner's arms without saying a word. Someone must have framed me. I am loyal to Lord Gavin. The slave owner struggled hard, his face flushed red. Humph, whether they were involved or not, we'll tell you after the investigation is thorough. The soldier leader didn't listen to his explanation at all, and the soldiers quickly searched through all the drawers and cabinets in the mansion. Soon, boxes of gold, silver, jewelry, and stacks of land deeds were moved into the courtyard. These are the assets I have accumulated over the years and have nothing to do with the assassination. The slave owner shouted in despair. However, the soldiers turned a deaf ear and continued the investigation in an orderly manner. As time went on, one slaveholder's mansion after another suffered the same fate, and Gavin successfully recovered most of the land, wealth, and population. This large-scale cleanup operation was swift and decisive. All towns were immersed in an atmosphere of silence and no one dared to stand up and resist. Those slave owners obviously understood Gavin's plan, and they went to the city of Rize to meet Gavin and offered their property to prove their innocence. At this moment, a merchant ship sailing from the stepstones slowly approached the shore. A sturdy messenger jumped off the ship in a hurry. He quickly found the soldier on duty at the port, revealed his identity, and said anxiously, I need to see Lord Gavin immediately under the order of Maester Qyburn. Seeing his serious expression, the soldier did not dare to delay and hurriedly led him to where Gavin was. After arriving at the city lord's mansion, the soldier informed the guards. Upon hearing that it was an urgent matter, the guards did not dare to delay and immediately brought the messenger to Gavin. Chapter 120. Letter from the Stone Steps Islands. Gavin sat in the lobby of the city lord's mansion with a gloomy face. The messenger hurriedly walked in and saluted Gavin. Then, he hurriedly took out a rolled bamboo tube from his arms and handed it to the blood dragon guard beside him with both hands. The blood dragon guard took the bamboo tube, opened it neatly, took out the letter inside, and handed it to Gavin. Gavin eagerly scanned the contents above, his expression instantly becoming even uglier, and his heart felt as heavy as if a huge rock was pressing on it. Robert's assassin tried to kill Daenerys again. Gavin was furious, his hands clenched tightly into fists, the joints turned white from the force. His eyes were wide open, and the anger seemed to burst out of his eyes. After a moment, Gavin suppressed his anger, put the letter on the table, and said to the messenger, You have travelled a long way and you must have worked hard. Go down and have a rest. The messenger hurriedly bowed and thanked him again. Thank you, Lord Gavin, this is what I should do. Then he stepped back. After the messenger left the room, Gavin quickly ordered the soldiers beside him, Call Hassan immediately. Yes, sir. The soldier saluted and left quickly. After a while, the door of the room was pushed open again, and Hassan hurried in. He saw the blood dragon guards putting equipment on Gavin, and asked in confusion, Sir, what happened? Are you leaving? Gavin nodded solemnly and said, "Not long ago, the Iron Throne sent someone to assassinate Daenerys. I'm a little worried, so I have to go back to take a look. Things here are now in your hands. Don't let anything go wrong while I'm away." Hassan immediately responded respectfully, "Don't worry, sir. I'm keeping an eye on this place. But there is one thing I just received this morning, and I haven't had time to report it to you yet. There is something going on in Mir. In addition to hiring the Golden Group, they have announced that they are going to hire other mercenary groups to expand the size of the army." Gavin frowned after hearing this and said in a deep voice, "As expected, the fleets of Mir and Tyrosh are no match for us. They dare not attack us at sea and can only cause trouble for us on land." Hassan then said, "Sir, should we prepare for the situation in advance? Gather troops to the border area." Gavin thought for a moment and said decisively, "Keep your troops in place for now and continue to observe their movements. However, we must strengthen the defense of the border and increase the number of patrols. If necessary, we can abandon some towns and wait until I come back. In addition, we must reorganize the prisoners while I am away." Hassan nodded and replied, "Yes, sir, I will arrange it right away." While organizing his equipment, Gavin said, "Report to me immediately if anything happens. I should be back soon." Hassan saluted again and turned to leave. Only Gavin was left in the room. He quickened the pace of putting on his equipment, his eyes full of anxiety. Hiss! With a loud roar from Blazing Shadow, its strong and powerful body suddenly shook, carrying Gavin quickly into the air and rushing towards the Stone Steps Islands. The strong wind was like a roaring beast, whistling wildly in Gavin's ears, and he lay tightly on Blazing Shadow's broad and warm back. Looking down from the air, the lush greenery of Rees Island is like a green ocean, dotted with clear streams and waterfalls, gleaming silver in the sun. White sandy beaches surround the island and meet the azure waters, forming a charming picture. As Chiaying continued to move forward, the island gradually became smaller, replaced by the endless sea. The turbulent sea surface was like undulating silk, with layers of white waves. The sea level in the distance was connected with the sky, and the water and the sky were connected, which was refreshing. However, Gavin had no intention of appreciating this beautiful scenery at the moment, and just wanted to get back to the Stone Steps Islands as soon as possible. The Chiaying's huge and powerful wings flapped tirelessly, and each flap brought up a strong airflow, drawing a graceful and sharp arc in the air. After flying for nearly a day, the distant Grey Gallows Island finally appeared in the hazy vision. Gavin patted Chiaying's neck, and Chiaying immediately increased his speed and flew towards the distant Grey Gallows Island. At this time, Boris, Coben, and others had already arrived at the Grey Gallows Island. When they received the news that Daenerys was assassinated, they were filled with panic and worry. It was not until they came here and saw that Daenerys was safe and sound that their hearts finally settled down and they became much calmer. At this moment, in the hall, Daenerys sat in the main seat, with Brienne in armor standing behind her, holding a meeting and discussing with several people below. The atmosphere in the room was solemn, and the faces of the two governors and the bachelor were full of worry and seriousness. Coben said in a deep voice, "The Iron Throne will not give up even if the assassination attempt failed. We must be prepared to guard against the sneak attack of the royal fleet and the assassins sent by the other side." Boris on the side echoed, "Yes, but the main force of our fleet is currently in Lys, and we must be prepared to defend the island." Then he looked at Daenerys and said, "Madam, I suggest that you temporarily avoid Dragonfire Bay. It is vulnerable and difficult to attack there. As long as the channel is blocked, it will be difficult for warships to enter." Daenerys looked at everyone with a firm gaze and said, "The usurper's little assassination tricks can't scare me away. I will guard this place with you." As if sensing Daenerys's inner anger, Vice Ryan, who was lying on the side, also roared. At this time, Harvey Strong advised, "Madam, you don't need to worry about the defense of the Stone Steps. Bloodstone Island and Grey Gallows are both easy to defend and difficult to attack. There is only one coast where you can land on the island. Even if the entire royal fleet is deployed, the fortifications on the high cliffs will prevent them from landing on the island. It is difficult for the royal fleet to capture any island in a short period of time. They can only choose to besiege it. Then Lord Gavin will definitely lead the fleet to rescue." Just when Daenerys was about to say something, a loud roar was heard, and the sound seemed to cut through the sky and reach people's hearts. Hearing the familiar voice, she immediately stood up, a surprised smile bloomed on her face, and said, "It's the voice of Blazing Shadow, Gavin is back." When everyone in the room heard the news, their originally tense nerves suddenly relaxed, as if they had found their backbone. The blazing shadow slowly fell on the open space in front of the city lord's mansion, and its huge body cast a shadow. Gavin jumped off the dragon's back neatly, with fatigue on his face, but his eyes were full of anxiety and concern. Gavin ordered the guard who was coming towards him, "Go and find more sheep. Chia Ying is starving." The guard immediately bowed his head and accepted the order, and hurriedly ran to carry it out.